The small boy burst from the bushes, a frantic terror spurring him onward. His mind was a maelstrom of fear and desperation, his body too weary to even cry for help. He forced his exhausted legs to propel his small frame forward, as fast as they could carry him away from the vengeful shouts of his pursuers. Far behind, the flickering light of their burning torches cast an ominous, dancing glow on the autumn leaves, an orange beacon of their needless fury. They were even more enraged that he had slipped away this time. But then again, a cry for help wouldn't have stopped them or brought anyone to his aid, for the villagers themselves were his hunters. It was always like this, every year when this day came around. The villagers hunted him. The young boy could never understand why they did it, and even on other days, their eyes held a look of thinly veiled disgust and hatred. He was afraid for his life every night, terrified that if he dared to step out into the darkness, they would come for him, and once again leave him battered and bruised in a pile of garbage on the side of the street. At an age no child should have to, he learned that the only safe place was behind the locked door of his tiny apartment. He rarely ventured out of his dreary home unless he had no other choice. This was his life, and he couldn't grasp why. It was as if the entire village hated him, when he had done nothing to earn their anger other than simply exist. But despite how terribly they treated him, he was safe enough as long as he didn't stray onto the streets after nightfall. Hiding in that apartment, curled up protectively on his broken-down bed with its countless broken springs, offered him some semblance of security from the villagers. Yet, even the relative safety of that run-down, filthy apartment where he had every night was not enough on this day. No, nowhere was safe for him on this particular day. Not on the one day any child should feel their happiest, October 10th, Uzumaki Naruto's birthday. There was no doubt that the front door of his apartment had already been caved in earlier that day as the hunt for him began. But this year, he hadn't stayed in that room, curled up in a corner, waiting in fear and tired resignation for them to come for him. He hadn't hoped that by offering no resistance, the beating might have some restraint, and he wouldn't suffer too many blows before the ninjas arrived to stop them from going too far. Even then, as the ninjas forced the irate villagers to leave, still spewing curses and insults at him, many of them often looked down at him from behind their animal-like masks with thinly veiled disgust, as if saving his life was something they were forced to do by orders they couldn't ignore. No, Naruto had had enough. Earlier that day, he had decided he was going to run. At 7 years old, the boy had chosen to run away from home, perhaps forever. He needed to get away from this life of neglect and the constant hateful glares of the other villagers. He had taken what few things he owned from that grimy apartment and packed them into an old rucksack, which was now slung awkwardly on his back. For the rest of that day, he watched the guards at the village's front gates, waiting for the change in patrol. He wasn't noticed while he watched, years of learning how to avoid the villagers' attention paying off as he stayed out of the ninja guard's sight. When his opportunity came, as the guards greeted one another while the first group was relieved by the second, he ran. At first, he thought the guards might have seen him as he passed the gate, but even if they had, they must have ignored him. It had been almost a full half-hour before the enraged villagers realized the child had escaped their grasp and started to chase their target. As he continued to run, the angry shouts of the villagers faded into the distance, now inaudible over the desperate heaving of his lungs. The young boy felt a wave of relief that he had escaped unnoticed. However, his weary run was cut short when a branch snagged his sandal, sending him tumbling head over heels until he smashed headfirst into a solid tree trunk. As blood began to pour from the wound, the boy saw stars before his eyes, a dim realization that it hurt settling in as darkness consumed him. Nearby, from the treetops, a shadow seemed to sigh, giving away the presence of a man hidden within the darkness. He looked down at the child from behind a mask, a shock of silver hair emerging from above the dog mask as the ninja gazed down at the child with a single visible eye and a concerned look. With a small gust of wind, the man vanished from the treetops, instantly appearing beside the unconscious child. After a quick assessment, he realized the child's injury wasn't severe, it was just exhaustion, coupled with the collision, that had caused Naruto to lose consciousness. As the ninja straightened up once more, his gaze turned toward a faint light that trembled in the distance. With a measure of relief, he gauged that the light was decreasing. The villagers had obviously started searching in the wrong direction, and it wouldn't be much longer until they gave up their search and returned to the village. For this single-eyed ninja, it was a duty he often chose to carry out to search for the child and watch over him on this day. It was a duty he often performed, but one he was not authorized to do. Many years before, only days after the child's birth, Heide Kakashi had stood before the village elders, demanding the right to become the guardian of the child, his late mentor's son. But the village elders had decided otherwise, overruling his sincere wish, even though the Hokage had supported him. He was banned from even seeing the boy outside of official missions. To the silver-haired man, it was his own shame that he couldn't even protect the child from the villagers, for without authorization, he couldn't intervene if the boy was attacked. The best he could do, year after year, was alert the Hokage the instant the boy seemed to be in danger. But this year was different. The boy had chosen to run from the villagers, and Kakashi had felt no need to stop him. It had been a simple matter to create a diversion when the boy ran for freedom. A single smoke bomb had drawn the guard's attention as the boy ran through the gate. He knew there was no way to hide this from the Hokage, and he would face punishment for this act, but he couldn't let his mentor's child suffer anymore. Even now, the ninja reached behind his head for the knot that held his hitayite in place, the symbol of his allegiance to Konoha, hoping that his long-gone father would forgive him for what he was about to do for the child's sake. But a rustle nearby stayed his hands, his mask turning quickly as he sought out the disturbance. As a precautionary measure, the ninja drew a kunai from the pouch at his waist, melting into the shadows as he awaited whatever came. "I'm sorry, Ji-san, but I can't take it anymore," Naruto cried out in his dream, looking up at the old man at his desk in the familiar room. Although the room was indistinct, seemingly immaterial as the boy couldn't remember the details, the Hokage was almost as perfect as he was in life, the large red and white hat perched perfectly on his head, his old yet kind face watching him, a pipe held in one gnarled hand as the man smiled down at him. Even though the old man smiled at him in his dreams, the boy was emotionally torn. The old man had been one of the very few people who had always been kind to him. When he had been sad and alone, the man had taken the time to come down from his lofty office to his grimy apartment to visit him, even though he was the leader of their village. The old man had always smiled kindly, laughed at the young boy's eager jokes, and even at some of the pranks the child had pulled. He also took the boy out at times, bringing the child to the Ichiraku ramen stand, his favorite place in the whole world. The old man was like family to him, the only family he had ever had. However, the old Hokage was being left behind, and even now, the kind face started to disappear, just as the room broke up behind him. Naruto couldn't hold back his tears as he shouted after the vanishing man, "I promise I'll come back. I'll become really strong, and I'll come back. I won't give up on my dream to become the Hokage, I promise, I promise." The child murmured slowly as he awoke. He felt the hot tears stream down his warm face as he tried to open his tired eyes. His head felt strangely fuzzy as he struggled to raise an arm to wipe the tears from his face, brushing the liquid away from the whisker-like birthmarks. As he did this, he felt something strange under his fingers. "Cloth. I wouldn't pull at that if I were you," a man's voice called softly from nearby, the accent strangely smooth and soft as whoever it was spoke. As the child struggled to turn and see who it was that spoke, he quickly realized he was somehow in a sleeping bag. It also seemed that he was in a small enclosure, lit brightly by the nearby campfire, the air warm and smelling distinctly of cooked fish. Across the fire, the boy's eyes slowly adjusted enough to the sudden light to see who was there. Smiling softly, his eyes seemingly closed, a man sat leaning against a tree, strangely dressed in pale blue robes, a rather odd choice for someone walking through the woods. Yet the robes seemed unmarred by dirt or grass, a testament to the man's skill in choosing his paths well amidst the rough brush. Medium-length black hair fell around his shoulders, framing his slightly narrow face, which was unmarred by scars or marks. A sheathed blade rested across his lap, the sheath the same pale blue as his robes, the guard strangely intricate, as if the blade were a ceremonial sword rather than a practical one. However, the worn material about the wrapped handle of the sword indicated it was a blade that had seen a lot of use. Even as the boy watched, the man unfurled his legs, now resting the sword on the trees as he made his way to the campfire, adjusting the obviously cooking fish to make sure they cooked evenly. Even as he did this, his eyes remained seemingly closed, as if he could see even with that expression. "Are you hungry?" the man suddenly asked, startling Naruto out of his thoughts. Before he could even ask, the loud rumbling that came from his stomach obviously gave the answer the man sought. The man's smile widened slightly in good humor as he replied, "It seems so, but I'm afraid these won't be finished for a while longer." As he stood once more, lightly brushing at his robes, he turned once more to the boy, that warm smile comforting to the child. With deft movements, the man walked over, easily hopping over a wooden stump before seating himself on the stump's opposite side, facing Naruto, who still lay in the blankets. The man lightly laced his fingers, looking down at Naruto as he began, "It surprised me to find one as young as you alone within the forest. Since we have some time before the fish cooks, perhaps you could tell me how you ended up here." Naruto shifted uneasily at the question, drawing his legs up from underneath the sheets before hugging his knees and looking downwards. It wasn't that he didn't trust the kind man, the man had obviously taken care of him and bore him no ill will, the question truly just a curious one. However, even if he was nice and kind, the man would obviously take him back to the village if Naruto revealed he had run away. After all, it was the responsible thing for any adult to do. "I'm sorry if the question offends you somehow. I was just concerned about how I found a child alone. I know you were probably taught not to talk to strangers, and that is a wise choice. I won't ask again unless you wish to tell me," the young man said softly, his smile still as kind as it was before as he made to get up from his seat on the stump. Naruto thought for a second that he may have offended the kind stranger and quickly blurted out, "No, wait. It's not that I don't trust you after all, you're a nice person, but it's just that I don't want to go back. If I don't tell you where I came from, you can't take me back." The man's pencil-thin eyebrows rose when he heard these words, his smile faltering slightly in surprise as he frowned, before saying softly, "That's a surprising thing to say, but there's no need for concern. If you don't wish to return, that will be your choice, and not one I shall interfere with." Naruto said in surprise, unable to hide the dumb look that spread across his features as the stranger smiled anew, replying softly, every person must learn on their own, be it from the experience of mistakes or the experience of successes. It is not my place, nor do I believe it is anyone else's place, to interfere unduly with another's path. I helped you out of concern for your well-being since you were injured and unconscious. As long as you are of sound mind and sound body, the next path you travel down is completely up to you, be it the path of safety or of risk. As long as you can walk it with your head high and look back at it upon its end and say you learned from it, then it is the right path to walk. Earlier, I believe in your exhaustion, you tripped and hit a tree, correct? The stranger asked the child. What did you learn? Naruto could only look up at the man blankly. The words he had spoken seemed to be important ones, but most of what he had said made little sense to his young mind. Now, he had been asked something about what he had learned from hitting the tree, and only one answer came to his mind. It hurt. The man's smile widened as he heard the words, before he softly replied, so, what does that tell you? What did you learn from knowing that hitting a tree with your head hurt? Not to hit a tree with my head again. Exactly. You have learned not to do it again. It hurt you, but hopefully by knowing this, you will aim not to do it again. You have learned. For that same reason, you must learn whether or not by running away you made a right choice or a wrong one, so I shall not interfere no matter what you tell me. I may advise you, but never force you, it shall be all up to you. As the stranger finished speaking, his smile ever present alongside his strangely closed eyes, Naruto could only look up at him dumbly as he tried to digest what he had been told. Ah, it looks like the fish has finished cooking, what perfect timing, the stranger suddenly said, jumping up lightly with a strangely graceful movement before crossing the clearing once more, humming a light tune as he knelt beside the cooking fish. Who are you? Naruto asked to the man's turned back as he tended to the food. The humming paused for a second before the man replied softly, who indeed? As of right now, I'm the man preparing your food. As of right now, you're the child hungrily awaiting the food. Once the food is cooked and the child's appetite is sated, maybe we shall both know more, but until then, patience, young child. Naruto shook his head, ignoring the protests of his cramping stomach as he said energetically, I meant your name. I'm Uzumaki Naruto, the man who will become the Hokage. However, he realized he had said too much, but old habits were hard to break. Ah, so you must hail from Konoha? A very prosperous village indeed, although a place with many prejudiced values and grudges. It is warming to know that such a village can produce an honest, upstanding child like you. After all, lofty goals are the best for any child to have. Naruto bristled slightly at the last part before vehemently returning, it's not lofty, I will become the Hokage, when I go back, that is. The child's words petered out slightly as he remembered he had just run from the village, his gaze falling back to his knees as he wrapped his arms around them tighter. So you do intend to return? That is good to hear. Having a definite destination is reassuring. Many people leave, saying they won't ever return, but that is a foolish path. I'm glad you have considered returning, and I said that your goal was lofty, that does not mean I think it is unattainable. The stranger calmly replied in that soft voice. You think I can do it? Naruto asked hopefully as he looked back up sharply. However, he quickly leaned back in surprise, having nearly knocked the plate the young man had brought out of his hands with his sudden movement. The man still smiled warmly as he offered the plate a second time, replying, I think if any person can, I would believe a person as earnest as you can. Many people believe that the heights are unattainable and never try, but it is those who believe they can make it are the ones who will. Naruto's face lit up at the man's kind words, and he eagerly took the plate, immediately devouring the fish. He ate so ravenously he didn't notice the young man, sitting on a tree stump watching him, didn't have a plate for himself. Nor was there any more fish cooking for him over the fire. Instead, the man reached into his robes, pulling out a small packet and a dried persimmon. He ate contentedly, but it was a small and hardly filling meal. Naruto had no idea that the man had only caught enough fish for one, and had given up his own proper meal for him. As Naruto continued to eat, the man spoke. Well, now that your appetite is satisfied, maybe you'd like to share more? I've learned you're from Konoha, and you chose to leave. I want to know why and what made you go. Naruto stopped eating, putting the plate down as he lowered his head again. The man said nothing, waiting patiently on the stump, his fingers clasped once more as his seemingly closed eyes watched the boy. I just had to get away from everything. Naruto spoke quietly, hesitantly. He was silent for a full 30 seconds, but the stranger waited patiently, not pressing him. He didn't want the child to shut down. The only sound for a while was the crackling fire, until Naruto spoke again. All my life, as far back as I can remember, the villagers have always hated me. They would glare at me, insult me, refuse to let me in their shops, even beat and kick me. Nobody wanted to be my friend. They would even tell their children to stay away from me, so I was always alone. They would throw rocks, shout, and curse at me. Sometimes the beatings were so bad I thought I might die, and even when those masked guys stopped them, they would glare at me, too. I just couldn't take it anymore. I needed to get away. The stranger didn't stir, his smile fading as he listened to the young boy's words and saw the empty, painful look in the eyes that had been so bright and innocent just moments before. After a few seconds of silence, the man said softly, I can understand why you wanted to escape now. But to be honest, I'm amazed that you wish to return, much less become Hokage. May I ask why? To prove them all wrong, Naruto suddenly declared. The stranger's brows rose in surprise as a fiery determination sparked in the boy's eyes. The boy continued heatedly, I'll show them all. I'll become the greatest ninja who ever lived, and become the Hokage. I'll show them all I'm not some monster. Once again, the stranger was silent before asking, even more softly, what will you do if they still don't believe in you? Can you still lead them all as the Hokage without wavering in your duties? I will, Naruto declared confidently, his voice ringing with steely resolve and his cerulean eyes burning intensely. After several seconds passed, the man spoke again. Kauta, ha! Naruto blurted out in surprise, not recognizing the term the man had used. Kauta, my name is Kauta. It may not be an appropriate name for me, but since I no longer bear any family name, I bear it with pride. My more appropriate title is the Wandering Sage, the man said calmly. Oh, so your name is Kauta, and the Wandering Sage? That's a cool name, Naruto replied with a bright smile. Thank you, but it may prove troublesome to know me. You have piqued my curiosity with your determination, and life tends to get quite exciting whenever sages are involved, even if it is only a nickname and not my true nature, Kauta replied with a smile, which confused the child. As I was saying, I'd like to offer you the choice to travel with me. The boy just gaped at him as Kauta continued, if you choose to come, I will impart what knowledge I have and train you in whatever ways I can. While I don't consider myself a ninja, but merely a traveler, what I can teach you will hopefully help you on your path to becoming the greatest ninja. You will also travel with me across the 5 nations, learning as much as you wish about the cultures and individual nations. When you think you are ready, or if you find the wanderer's lifestyle too difficult or unsuitable for you, I will return you to Konoha whenever you wish. Kauta sat still after this declaration, curious whether the boy would throw in his lot with him or choose otherwise. What he didn't expect was a blonde missile to the stomach as he was practically tackled off the stump, falling to the grass as the child wrapped his arms around his midriff, shouting thank you, over and over at the top of his lungs. His surprise turned back into a gentle expression. His kind smile was back on his lips as he laid a hand atop the blonde mess of hair around his midriff, saying, There's no need to thank me, but if you wish to follow me, you will need your rest. We rise early, and you'll need a clear mind to learn as we go. With one more loud thank you, the boy vanished with surprising speed, diving into the bed he had been resting in before and closing his eyes, as if he could force himself to sleep faster. Kauta smiled gently as he looked at the child, curious about what the future would be like with this excitable student. As the fire died down, a beautiful tune could be heard echoing around the campsite, slowly rising and falling as if the pure notes echoed the movement of the waves against the shore. Beside the boy, now resting peacefully with a smile on his face, the acclaimed wandering sage sat on the wooden stump, a small wooden flute in his hands. He focused, playing the soft tune as if to lull the child to sleep, his own features calm as he enjoyed his favorite pastime. As the moon rose in the night sky, the fire finally died down, plunging the encampment into darkness. Kauta slowly finished the tune on one more pure note before carefully stowing the beautifully crafted flute into one of the packs by the fire. With this movement, he rose, calmly straightening his robes once more before casting his eyes to the right and quietly calling out in his soft voice, So, how much longer do you plan to hide behind the tree before you reveal yourself? The child sleeps peacefully now, so it's time to settle whatever reason you have for coming. With a soft breeze, a shadow emerged from the darkness, becoming solid once more as the ninja walked out, one eye watching the man carefully as he said, You're pretty good to have noticed my hiding place that easily. That is hardly praise, coming from one who deliberately let himself be noticed easily, Kauta replied softly, stepping away from the campfire and toward the man with the mask. As the man came to a stop, Kakashi could finally appreciate the man before him in his entirety. Although the impractical soft robes made him look like a commoner at first, the way he had walked betrayed Kauta experienced movements with a grace and finesse that would have put any dancing performer to shame. Or martial artist, Kakashi thought dryly, wishing he had bothered to uncover his Sharingan before approaching the man. With a critical eye, he quickly evaluated the man's body. Once again, the robes made it difficult to judge, but Kakashi was willing to bet that the man's lean frame, surprisingly tall at around 6 feet, was covered in perfectly sculpted muscles, well used to long-term exertion from a man who had lived a dangerous life. This was despite the deceptively flawless appearance of the man's skin, with no scar or mark to mar his body, as if he had never been in a situation where he had been hurt in his life. If even half of what the child has told me is true, then I'm afraid I cannot let you take the child back to that village, Kauta said bluntly, his soft voice now unusually hard as his tone changed. His eyes were still closed as before, but his silhouette now angled, giving his features a sharper, more dangerous look. However, Kakashi shrugged, replying in a soft tone, I have no intention of doing so. My intentions were to guard him from the shadows until he was safe, and if there was no other option, to take him away myself. So that's why you were testing me earlier? I have to say you were thorough. It took quite a bit of skill to dispel it all. That genjutsu with the flock of giant eagles was particularly impressive. If a bit naive to try to shock me into making a mistake, Cao Dao replied softly once more, his tense posture relaxing as he realized he wasn't facing an enemy. It's you who surprised me. I tried every single one I could think of, and none of them worked. You didn't even fall for the drunk man stumbling into the encampment, and I thought that one was pretty believable. Are you sure you're telling the truth when you said you're not a ninja? Kakashi replied in a more relaxed tone, crossing his arms as he leaned against the nearby tree. Cao Dao chuckled softly in reply, answering, one can know the techniques of a ninja yet not be one. I guess in a way, you may call me an uninitiated ninja, same as the young child. But I did not receive the formal pre-initiation training of any village. Everything I have learned has been learned through my travels across the 5 nations. Kakashi nodded, but with absolutely no warning and in complete silence, he stabbed a kunai forward, aiming at the sage's heart, and consequently coughed and gagged painfully, acutely aware of how the world had changed around him to look like the night sky. A single leaf fell, blocking the view out of the single hole in his mask for his eye to see from. His mind went over what he had seen in that instant. As his kunai stabbed forward, the sage had, rather than dodge, retreat, or block, moved into the attack. The kunai barely missed his chest as Cao Dao reached forward, one hand holding the extended arm in a vice grip, stopping Kakashi's movement as a second one grabbed onto the opposite shoulder. Moving with fluid ease, he had thrown the ninja over his leg, softly to the floor. It would have been a light impact, but bad luck placed a root from the nearby tree sticking out, and that impact on his spine had stunned him. Now, I'm sure you said I passed your tests just a few seconds ago. Was there any need for that? Cao Dao said, his soft voice ringing from nearby with a strangely cheerful camaraderie despite having just narrowly avoided being stabbed. As the breeze blew the leaf from his mask, Kakashi looked up into the face of the still smiling man looking down at him, now offering a hand to lift him back up. I knew I should have used a cage bunshin. Kakashi thought regretfully as he suddenly spun his legs rapidly, aiming to sweep the man from his feet. However, the sage easily leaped over the movement, turning his jump into a graceful backflip as he moved away from any more counterattacks. Tensing his stomach muscles, Kakashi flipped up from the floor himself. He swung the kunai about his fingertip via the hole in its handle before pointing the weapon toward his pack and sheathing it by pushing it through the kunai pack's opening. Having done so, Kakashi settled into a taijutsu stance instead, clenching his fists up in front with a tight stance. Across the way, Cao Dao smiled amicably as he also settled into his own stance, almost the opposite of Kakashi's. His arms were stretched wide to the back and front, with palms open in a wide standing stance that Kakashi couldn't recognize. Once again, Kakashi regretted his choice not to remove his mask as he eyed the sage's stance warily, realizing he could have memorized the unique taijutsu stance of the sage if he had fought with the Sharingan. But it was too late now. Some instinct warned him that the instant he was distracted to throw the mask aside, he would face instant defeat from the man before him. Instead, he closed the gap instantly with a kick to the ground, his right fist thrown forward at the sage's smiling face. With a pivot, Cao Dao brought his forward arm around to the attack, his wrist pivoting as his open palm almost slapped Kakashi's fist, sending the attack downward. Kakashi's arm followed the movement due to the spiral motion of Cao Dao's arm as he brought the second palm forward, using the distance he had kept the second arm for momentum to strike faster, aiming for Kakashi's chest. However, Kakashi blocked the lunge with his own left fist, using the armor on the back of his glove to deaden the blow, grabbing onto Cao Dao's first arm with his right arm, pinning it to his body as he aimed a kick at Cao Dao's forward leg, hoping to force him off balance for a throw. The sage predicted the move, and rather than simply trying to dodge, turned the movement into a counterstrike, his knee flying upward to smash into Kakashi's unguarded torso as the ninja's kick missed its target. The ninja ground his teeth slightly as he was forced to use a messy maneuver, falling backward and pulling Cao Dao with him, barely managing to ram his own knee against the sage's strike to stop it. Continuing the movement as he fell, Kakashi used the momentum in mid-fall to his advantage, lifting his other leg up to push at the sage's body, performing an impressive aerial throw to send the sage over his body and flying away. As Kakashi kicked outward, landing on his back as well, the extra momentum from his backward fall combined with the kick sent the sage hurtling over Kakashi's body, where any normal person would have fallen uncontrollably and slammed onto the ground back first. However, it seemed Cao Dao had experience with this form of martial arts as well, easily correcting his fall in midair, curling his body inward as he forced his legs down, landing hard on his feet instead but facing the wrong way to Kakashi, who quickly flipped up from the ground once more to close the distance. Quickly spinning on the spot, his blue robes whipping through the air with the speed he moved, Cao Dao aimed a kick at the charging ninja, but Kakashi ducked low, under the attack, swinging his fist at the opening. Leaning back at an almost impossible angle, the attack merely brushed against the sage's robes as he quickly grabbed the attacking arm with his own, completing his impossible lean by spinning on one foot, disorienting the ninja as he was now being pulled off balance. It was a fast move, but one that could be easily recovered from, if it weren't for the very solid tree Kakashi was being pointed at, the environment working against him for a second time as Kauta aimed to slam him off the tree. Cursing quietly, Kakashi pushed a hand off the tree instead, bracing off it and giving himself enough time to get a supporting leg down to stop what could have been a headfirst impact with the tree. But that had bought the sage a second as well, and with it, he released Kakashi's arm before grabbing onto the ninja's uniform about his navel with one hand and the opposite shoulder with his other. In this strange, awkward pose, both combatants paused. Kakashi sighed irritably as he muttered, "My loss." In the pose the sage had him, Kauta had complete control over Kakashi's next move. Anything he would have tried, Kauta could have countered by throwing him solidly into the tree. While it was a bit annoying that the tree had essentially won the short martial arts clash for Kauta, it was also knowledge of the environment that Kauta had wisely used against Kakashi, so it was still his victory. Even as he thought this, he wondered if that route he had landed on earlier had also been part of the mysterious stranger's strategy. If the battle was one of pure taijutsu, the sage had easily won. While Kakashi could have used the Kawarimi no Jutsu to escape, he had already decided to test the sage with pure taijutsu movements. A dangerous master. Despite his serene demeanor, the man was undoubtedly a master of close-quarters combat. While Kakashi was certain the Sharingan would have given him a fighting chance, he wasn't entirely confident he could defeat the calm stranger. The man also possessed a rare ability to easily break genjutsu, an ease Kakashi had seldom seen in other ninja. Even his strongest illusion hadn't trapped the man for long. Kakashi was desperate to see if the sage could use jutsu, but doing so would alert Naruto to his presence, and that was no longer necessary. As the sage released his hold, both men straightened up, Kauta stepping back to give Kakashi space to recover. A gentle smile was ever present on his face, his breathing smooth and even as if their confrontation had required no effort at all. Brushing stray leaves and grass off his uniform, Kakashi mumbled, "Hey Kakashi, when you return Naruto, that name might give you some leverage if you tell the gate guards you're a friend of mine." Kauta bowed slightly before responding, "Kauta, the wandering sage. You are a good man, Kakashi. I could tell from your words and your movements in combat that, despite your flaws, your heart is pure. I would be honored to count you among my acquaintances. If you spoke the truth, you would have been willing to betray your village for that child's sake. A ninja who abandons their village has essentially forsaken their life, given how the world would view them. You are truly a better man than many." Beneath his mask, Kakashi raised an eyebrow. You don't automatically see missing nin as traitors. If two people hold opposing views, does that mean one must be right and the other wrong? That one is good and the other bad? Every person must follow what they believe is right. If it leads to conflict, then so be it. As long as their heart is pure in the act, then their actions are pure, even if it appears to be the wrong path to others. As long as you believe it is the right path and are driven by the right emotions, then it is the right path, regardless of the outcome. Kakashi's lone eye widened at the speech. His own personal beliefs, his long-held dogma, resonated with the sage's words. Though the circumstances were vastly different, his conviction that those who abandoned friends for the sake of a mission were worse than those who abandoned the mission for friends aligned perfectly with the sage's philosophy on human action. As Kauta turned to leave, he quietly asked, "How much does Naruto know about what dwells within him?" Kakashi's body almost reeled at the question. He quickly brandished a kunao and prepared to lift his umbu mask and reveal his Sharingan. His voice was a bare whisper as he demanded, "How did you figure this out? Your answer will decide if I have to take you down. Now, speak." Kauta turned slowly, taking no action that could be seen as an attack. His usual smile was now tinged with sadness as he replied, "While many people are smarter than me, I pride myself on my perception of such things. Today marks the 7th year since the Kyuubi attacked Konoha, and the young boy appears to be about 7 years old. Coincidence perhaps, but in my travels, I have met several of this generation's Jinchuriki, and I have noticed they tend to share traits with the beast within them. Naruto has whisker-shaped marks on his face, which I doubt can be explained as a genetic trait. Finally, the injury on his head healed at an almost inhuman speed. In fact, he no longer needs that bandage, but just in case he, as I suspected, doesn't know, I made him keep it on." Adding these details together, I surmised he might be the Kyuubi Jinchuriki, but it was your reaction that confirmed it beyond a doubt. But Kauta's voice suddenly shifted, returning to the harsh, dangerous tone from earlier. "If I'm right, this means all the abuse he has suffered is because he is that beast's container, because he, as a baby, was forced against his will to become its jailer. There is no excuse for your village letting a child be so badly treated for being the very method of their protection from that monster. For the first time in many, many years, I am furious. This Hokage of yours should have taken care of this boy, but instead, he was cast out by society, beaten and abused. A child so pure and honest-hearted was made to suffer a stigma he had no right to bear. There is no excuse for any man, let alone the Hokage, to have failed so miserably in his duty." As he spoke, he suddenly strode forward, grabbing Kakashi's uniform, ignoring the kunao the ninja still held. He pulled his face close to Kakashi's, almost whispering, "Return to your village and ensure no one prevents you from getting an audience with Hiruzen. You tell him exactly who will be caring for the boy, and tell him I will return with the boy. And if he doesn't have a good enough explanation for what he has done and failed to do when I arrive." At this, Kakashi's heart nearly stopped. The pure waves of rage and killing intent pouring from the man threatened to crush him to the ground. His legs weakened, unable to support him, and the kunao fell to the forest floor. The only reason he didn't collapse was because Kauta held him upright by his uniform. Kauta leaned in close, his eyes partially opening for the first time, revealing what would normally be beautiful sky blue eyes, a rare color many would kill to possess. But now, they seemed to burn with rage and anger, drilling into Kakashi's singular visible eye as the sage stared deeply into his mask. With finality, the sage whispered these last words: "He will answer to me." With that, the man released his grip on the ninja's uniform. Kakashi barely regained control of his limbs in time to keep himself from falling to the ground. He was breathing heavily, sweat pouring across his body, his heart hammering in his chest. What is this man? Kakashi marveled as he tried to remember how to breathe. Never in his life had he felt such fear. The man had just inspired it with mere words. He felt like he had been killed multiple times. He felt such a vast disparity between himself and the man in robes, the gap between their true capabilities so wide that it was as if a cage stood before him. With that, Kauta took a deep breath, as if to calm himself. After a few seconds, that smile returned to his face, washing away the anger that had momentarily been released. Almost apologetically, he lowered himself beside the ninja, helping the silver-haired man back to his feet. In his soft voice, he said, "Sorry, but when I get emotional, I don't quite know how to keep it in check. I apologize if I may have frightened you." As Kakashi finally managed to stand straight, Kauta bowed apologetically before adding, "If it's any consolation, don't forget to tell the Hokage that I will not be happy if you are punished for this. Make sure he knows exactly who I am. If my story is as well known as I hope, the Hokage won't take any action against you." Kakashi could only stare at him in surprise. Thoughts suddenly began to piece together. He remembered that only moments ago, the man had used the Hokage's first name. He's hiding something. If he referred to the Hokage by his first name, then he must have met him before. However, he said nothing, instead forming a hand seal and stating, "I will pass on your message to the Hokage. Please, take care of the boy." As Kauta nodded silently, the leaves seemed to swirl around the ninja, obscuring him from view. As they dissipated, the ninja with the dog mask had vanished. The weight of a village. The Hokage stared sadly out of the large office window at the bright festivities below, the brilliant festival that took place each year to mark the defeat of the Kyuubi. While for many it was a time of celebration, it was also a time of sadness, and the Hokage was no exception. Every year, he was reminded of the numerous ninja who had died trying to defeat the demon fox. What was worse for him was the knowledge that they had all died under his command. He was meant to be the greatest ninja of Konoha, but faced with the force of nature the Kyuubi represented, he was helpless, only able to do his best to save as many as he could, even as ninjas died screaming around him. It had taken the newest Hokage, barely elected months before by the old man, to give up his own life to seal the fox away into his newborn child, sacrificing his own soul to do so. With his death, the fox's reign of destruction had ended, and the village had been saved thanks to his heroic actions. But it was here that the greatest failing had occurred. It had been the wish of Minato, the fourth Hokage, that his son be raised as a hero and become a magnificent ninja capable of protecting Konoha. However, the villagers were unable to see past their hatred and grief over the deaths of their loved ones. The moment it was revealed that Naruto Uzumaki had become the living prison of the Kyuubi, there had been mass riots, with people screaming in the streets, hungry for the newborn baby's death. It had taken nearly every ninja still alive in Konoha to stop them. It was at this time that, in order to protect the child from what had now become a curse for him, Sarutobi had passed the ban on all knowledge regarding the Kyuubi from the child, that no villager may ever pass on their knowledge of the Jinchuriki to any of the next generation of Konoha. It had been the old Hokage's hope that by restricting information, the child could perhaps grow up peacefully with the next generation of children. However, the villagers could not forget their hatred, and many still resented him to this day. Even though knowledge was restricted, parents told their children to stay far away from the boy, and children were very impressionable, so they adopted their parents' distrust of the boy even though they didn't know why. Every day, he had to keep a vigil over the boy, for it was far too often that the villagers would turn on the child. The orphanage had even kicked him out, leaving a poor child to fend for himself on the streets. After learning this, the Hokage had secured an apartment for the boy in the central district and, through thinly veiled threats of retribution, impressed upon the neighbors to not react poorly to the young boy's presence. It hurt the old man's heart to know that the boy had to fend for himself. Years ago, he had been so hopeful when, only days after the riots, one man, still barely a boy in his estimation, had stepped before him, asking to be released from active duty, almost pleading to be given guardianship of the newborn child. It didn't take much to realize that somehow, the young Heite Kakashi had learned that the baby was indeed the son of his mentor. Out of respect for his deceased mentor, he wished to take care of the young child. While he would have regretted losing the services of the young genius ninja from his Umbu forces, he knew there would have been no better candidate than the young student of the child's father. But Danzo had interfered, persuading the council that not only could the village not afford to lose the ninja's services, but that leaving the future Jinchuriki in Kakashi's care would be too much of a danger for the Jinchuriki, as it presented a possible information leak. If it became known outside the village that the genius ninja Sharinan Kakashi had adopted a child, it would lead to the discovery of Naruto as a Jinchuriki. Even if that were the case, Sarutobi refused to agree, appealing against it again and again. But his persistence only made things worse, as the council decided that no contact between the child and Kakashi was to be permitted. The young ninja couldn't do anything to stop what happened to the child, he was restricted to merely watching from a distance. He couldn't even intervene if the boy was attacked, only report it to the other Umbu, who were often deliberately slow to come to the boy's aid. He knew the risk was even worse on this day. Every year, on this day, something happened to the child, and he was helpless to do anything. All he could do was increase the number of Umbu watching the streets, with orders to break up any group that looked potentially dangerous. But he knew it would not be enough, for so many of his Umbu would willingly wait and watch until the boy had been attacked, only intervening when his life was truly at risk. It disgusted him, but he also knew it was because of the upset and grief many felt at the loss of loved ones. At least that's what some of them were. There were also those who just attacked the child out of fear of what he was, ones who had never even been hurt by the Kyuubi. It was these people that truly sickened Sarutobi, but as usual, there was little he could do to help the child, for anything that brought undue notice to the child could attract the attention of spies from other villages. As he drew another tired breath, he felt a presence enter the room silently behind him. Turning around, he was surprised to find the silver hair sticking out from atop the dog mask that the Umbu operative wore. Kakashi? This is rare. I wouldn't expect a visit from you on this day of all days, Sarutobi said slowly, moving to sit at his desk and face the Jounin. Kakashi stood at attention before reporting, "My apologies, Hokage-sama, but I have an urgent report to make." Sarutobi's heart dropped as he heard the words, fearing the worst as his thoughts drifted to the young child Kakashi would normally be tailing tonight. In an instant, he jumped from his desk, his gnarled frame strangely agile as he picked up the wide hat that represented his office, putting it atop his head as he made for the door. "You can explain it on the way." "My pardon, but I would rather do so here," Hokage-sama, Kakashi replied stiffly, not moving from the spot as the older man's forward motion slowed to a halt. The old man's arm that had been reaching for the door slowly fell to his side as he swallowed the lump in his throat, asking, "Report." Kakashi nodded stiffly before explaining, "As of 1700 hours, Uzumaki Naruto attempted to run away from Konoha. Thanks to the restraining orders that are in effect on me, I was unable to stop him from leaving Konoha." The old man breathed out slowly, rubbing a hand over his eyes before slowly returning to his seat. With a weary sigh, he looked down at the photo on his desk of Minato Namikaze, the Yondaime Hokage. "I can trust, since you're here, that the boy is safe?" "What happened?" the old man asked wearily. Kakashi remained silent for a moment, composing his thoughts before he spent the next 10 minutes explaining the child's escape through the forests, the incident when he was knocked unconscious, and the sudden appearance of the man who took care of him. It was at this point that Kakashi hesitated. The Hokage had remained silent throughout it all, his wise eyes watching him intently, but here was where things could go wrong. The man, after speaking at length to Naruto and hearing of the, for lack of better words, mistreatment the child has suffered, offered Naruto the option to travel with him until he felt he was ready to return, and the child accepted his offer. Once again, the man rose from his seat, picking up the old pipe from his desk as he turned his back to the ninja. For a while, there was silence between them as the old man quietly watched the flashing lights of fireworks and listened to the sounds of jubilation from the festival parading happily on the streets visible from the office windows. Without looking back at the ninja, Sarutobi spoke quietly, "Kakashi, you have served the village faithfully for many years, and I have come to value your opinion and trust your judgment, so I shall ask you now, with your truest and most honest opinion, do you believe this is the right choice for Naruto's future?" The answer was almost immediate. Kakashi paused for only a second to lift his gloved hand and raise his dog mask, revealing the true face of the silver-haired shinobi beneath, the one he always hid behind a mask. One eye regarded the window, where Kakashi could see the old man's reflection watching his reaction intently. In the window's reflection, the Hokage could see him clearly. His one good eye was filled with a determined gaze, his one scarred eye closed, his lips forming words clear enough for the Hokage to see. The words were read by his motions as well as heard by his ears. Without a doubt. Once again, silence filled the room. The old man's free hand now rummaged quietly through his robes. A few seconds later, a lighter was produced in those gnarled hands. With slow, deliberate motions, the pipe in his hands was lit. With another slow motion, the lighter was stored away within the recesses of those robes as the pipe was raised to his lips. As the Hokage thought in silence, so did Kakashi, hoping in his mind that the Hokage would see reason. True, in one way, the situation was disastrous. Konoha's Jinchuriki had fled and was now traveling with only a sole guardian to protect him from being targeted by other villages. But for Naruto, this was also the greatest opportunity he had ever had. His new guardian seemed to be a well-traveled man with exceptional intelligence, experience, and strength far beyond the norm even among shinobi. So much so that even Kakashi himself wouldn't want to fight the man in real combat. The man was virtually impervious to genjutsu, with an extraordinary level of taijutsu, and was likely a kenjutsu master, given that he carried a blade. Although he hadn't revealed any ninjutsu abilities, Kakashi instinctively doubted there were many people who could claim to be as strong as this mysterious wandering sage. So, who is this guardian you've so willingly entrusted the boy to? Is he a man you can rely on? Hokage-sama, Kakashi said, a note of disbelief in his voice as he accidentally activated his Sharingan. Both his normal and special eyes widened as the Hokage's words hinted he might be considering allowing Naruto to leave. As the old man turned, Kakashi was once again struck by how ancient their village leader was, his face etched with age and weariness even as he offered a sad smile. Indeed, Kakashi, we've done the boy, who should be our savior, too many wrongs. Due to our positions, neither you nor I could intervene directly to ease his suffering. But, if you truly believe this is the best path for him, and you can trust that this man won't lead him astray, then I will trust him too and entrust the boy's future to him, rather than leave him to suffer here. With that, the old man's gnarled fingers reached for the picture on his desk of the man who should have succeeded him, his eyes momentarily sad once more. Yes, the old man repeated, a spark returning to his eyes. Why not? I'll make sure the council sees our point of view. I'll force them to if I must, and I'll deal with Danzo on this issue once and for all. I was too weak and backed down the last time a guardian stepped forward for the boy, but this time, I won't. I am the Hokage, after all. There must be some perks to having this title. Don't worry, Kakashi, if you believe this is what will most benefit Naruto, I swear I will make it happen. For a second, the old man's eyes flicked up, catching Kakashi off guard as he quickly raised a gloved hand to cover his chin and mouth, not fast enough to hide the ghost of a smile. After a small cough of embarrassment, Kakashi continued, I believe this man is both wise and strong enough to protect Naruto, and if my instincts are correct, he will be a perfect mentor, perhaps even better than attending the academy. He also seems to have only Naruto's best interests at heart. He made the offer so Naruto could gain the knowledge and strength to achieve his goal of becoming Hokage. Hearing this, the Hokage's weathered face finally broke into a smile. The boy's unbelievable, earnest ambition to surpass him never failed to warm his heart. What an interesting man, to so surely think he can be the one to help Naruto achieve his dream. Did you get his name? Yes, Hokage-sama, he called himself Kauta, the wandering sage. Clatter. Once again, Kakashi's eyes widened as he heard the loud sound of a falling object bouncing off the floor. It was the pipe the Hokage had been holding just seconds before. The old man himself was staring wide-eyed at Kakashi. Kauta-san, I can hardly believe I'm hearing that name again, the old man said in disbelief, grabbing hold of his desk to steady himself. Sorry? Kakashi asked, confused, but the old man still seemed shell-shocked. Is it really a coincidence that those two would cross paths? I knew the boy was destined for a unique fate, but for it to lead him directly to the wandering sage? Kakashi could only watch as the old man began to mutter to himself, worrying the silver-haired ninja. For a second, Kakashi doubted his decision, his body preparing for action, his mind already retracing the steps to the camp where the boy was sleeping in what he had believed to be safety, but which the Hokage's words now made him believe might not be. Hoo. A low chuckle, which caused Kakashi to pause and turn back to the old man, suddenly erupted into raucous laughter, the old man bending over as he wheezed and tried to catch his breath. Ha, of course this would happen. It's always in the most mysterious of circumstances that man comes and goes, but this is perfect. As the old man finally recovered, for the first time in 7 years, on the 10th of October, the date of the festival of the Kyubai's defeat, the date of Naruto Uzumaki's birth, Hiruzen Sarutobi's face broke into a wide smile full of mirth and happiness. As if this turn of events had removed the weight of age from his body, the Hokage easily bent forward, stooping to pick up the dropped pipe before quickly returning to his full height. He placed the pipe back between his lips and looked out the window, a genuine smile on his face as he watched the festivities below for the first time. With another chuckle, the now rejuvenated man spoke, Yes, this is perfect. There is no one in this world I would trust with that boy's safety and fate more than him. I never expected to hear of a sighting of that lone wanderer again, let alone be able to use his services in this way. Yes, this is perfect. The boy will travel the 5 nations with the wanderer. There are few greater paths in life than to follow in that sage's footsteps. I'm glad fortune smiled on that poor boy in this way. There may only be one problem, though, the Hokage said finally, turning his head slightly to look at the stunned Kakashi, his smile still in place. I doubt the boy who returns to this village will be the same one we remember. That man has a habit of changing the destinies of those whose paths he crosses. Only time will tell. For now, let us wait and hope for Naruto's return. So, it seems we have finally arrived, Kauta's soft voice observed as he reached up to push the edge of the socket he wore, squinting slightly at the sunlight as he looked at the great gates of Konoha. Beside him, a boy who couldn't be much older than 12 grinned widely, eagerly looking at the giant gates that marked his return. Yep, it feels good to be back. The man shook his head in disbelief, looking down at the child beside him, but a smile spread across his face when he saw the pure anticipation in Naruto's eyes. Not much had changed about the wandering sage in the 5 years he had been traveling. He still favored his pale blue robes, which were strangely at odds with the random merchants and villagers who cast furtive glances at his and Naruto's almost gaudy clothing. The only noticeable addition was the socket he wore to shield his eyes from the harsh sun. The katana he carried was still concealed within the folds of his blue robes. In contrast, there was another sword visible, but this one was a shorter, thinner kotoki, different from the sage's long katana. It was sheathed in a dark blue cover and worn by Naruto, strapped diagonally across his back with the hilt protruding over his right shoulder. Unlike the sage, Naruto had changed dramatically. Gone was the weak boy who used to shy away from others in fear of retaliation. Now, Naruto carried himself with pride, standing tall, or rather, short, since he hadn't yet hit his growth spurt. His spiky blonde hair was no longer unruly, as his mentor had once impressed upon him that his standard of hygiene had to change. A drastic shift from his normal regime of once a week to once a day had caused an incredible transformation in his tangled, dirty blonde hair. With this change, Naruto had begun to keep his hair longer than before, with bangs falling forward close to his eyebrows and the rest tied in a ponytail that reached his shoulder blades. One might expect Naruto to have adopted his mentor's style of clothing, but he was too stubborn to wear anything that he thought looked girly, so the pale blue robes were out of the question. However, his orange jumpsuit had been systematically destroyed by months of travel, and no matter how much he begged, his mentor would not consent to buying anything even remotely similar to that awful excuse for clothing. Instead, Naruto was forced to replace his clothes with ones his mentor found agreeable. The new clothing was a far cry from the jumpsuit, dark blue shinobi pants with a black weapons pouch strapped to his right thigh and a black vest which, on his mentor's advice, had been reinforced with a light chainmail mesh. Over this, he wore a cerulean jacket, chosen to match his amazing cerulean blue eyes, much like his mentor's robes matched his own sky blue eyes, which he normally kept hidden. He completed the look with a pair of black combat boots. Although much of his appearance had changed, the light armor and sword making him look more like the shinobi he wanted to be, nothing could change the kindness and openness that radiated from his eyes, nor the fox-like grin that now split his face. Flicking the socket back down to block the sun's glare, Kauta quietly asked, "Are you sure this is what you want, Naruto? There is still so much of the world you didn't get a chance to see in this short time, many places I couldn't find the time to take you. You can always return later, with much more experience than you have now, so are you certain you wish to return now?" Naruto shook his head before looking back up at the taller man, beaming happily as he replied, "No, I want to come back now, because if I don't rejoin the academy this year, I won't graduate with people my own age." Kauta shrugged slightly, countering, "But I never graduated from any academy, and my life has been fine hectic, but certainly enjoyable. So why is it so important that you graduate with them? Weren't they the ones who ignored and mistreated you?" "Yes, but that's exactly why," Naruto answered seriously, frowning as the two once again started this verbal battle for what was easily the 100th time in the last few days. "If I can prove to the people in my same year that I changed and that I'm worth being accepted, then it's the first step toward getting the whole village to accept me." Kauta sighed sadly, raising his hands in a gesture of mock surrender. He had grown attached to the young boy during their travels. It had been enjoyable traveling with him and teaching him all the knowledge he could. Not only that, but in every town and village they had visited, the boy had somehow drawn people to them, making friends in ways Kauta had never seen before, almost as if his kindness drew others who needed companionship. And this was what concerned the older man. He still remembered the chilling stories Naruto had hesitantly told him, and no matter how you looked at it, the village of Konoha was the worst place for this boy to go. It went against every nerve in his body to let the boy return. But he had promised Naruto years ago that he would never go against his wishes and dreams, and he was a man of his word, no matter how much he sometimes wished he wasn't. All he could do were these verbal arguments, but Naruto was far too headstrong to listen now. Hey, Kauta Shishao, come on, let's go. I want to go to Ichiraku's. I've been dreaming about getting ramen from there for weeks." Naruto suddenly shouted eagerly, startling the man out of his thoughts. "Okay, let's go, but you really don't need to keep calling me that. I'm no teacher, just a wanderer." Kauta began amicably, but his words trailed off as he noticed two people in matching Konoha combat vests striding forward from their posts at the gate to intercept them. Judging by their expressions, they weren't happy to see the pair. "You two, stop right there. What do you think you're doing back here?" the taller ninja said scathingly as he approached, the second part of the challenge obviously aimed at Naruto. Beside him, Naruto tensed slightly, his smile faltering. He recovered quickly, though the smile looked strained, and was about to reply, but a pale blue sleeve swept up in front of him as Kauta raised his arm, signaling for him to wait. Unlike the boy, Kauta maintained a calm expression as he softly replied, "Greetings. My name is Kauta, a traveler from distant lands, and the child with me is Uzumaki Naruto of the village of Konoha, returning after an extended training trip. My apologies, my presence here has very little purpose other than to explain that I am the child's guide and protector. If necessary, I will submit to any checks required for outsiders to enter the village. No, not you, the second ninja suddenly spoke up, cutting Kauta's explanation short and rubbing a hand across his eyes as if he were dealing with a fool. Kauta, playing the part, raised his brow in feigned surprise. Well, if there's no issue with me entering the village, then we'll be on our way. Good day. Come, Naruto, I am most anxious to see this Ichiraku for myself. Smiling amicably, Kauta made to pass the two guards, signaling for Naruto to follow. Naruto quietly went to join him, but the second ninja pushed forward, stepping between Kauta and Naruto and glaring down at the boy. You're free to go, as long as you know not to cause trouble in the village, but that boy you bring with you is not welcome. The taller ninja spoke as he and his partner glared down at Naruto, who did his best to stand tall but was clearly struggling to do so confidently. Kauta looked back at the two in confusion, or at least he appeared to, as his eyes were seemingly closed. However, his brows were still raised high. I'm sorry, but please, do explain exactly what Naruto did to make you so unwilling to allow his return? At this seemingly innocent question born of a confused traveler's stupidity, the two ninjas faltered for a second. After all, speaking of the Kyuubi was a capital offense, even if they were unaware of how much knowledge the sage already had about the village and all the history that had occurred within the great walls of Konoha. However, the taller ninja quickly came up with a justifiable answer, taking a second to compose his face back to neutral from the glare he had been giving Naruto. He looked back at the sage. This is Konoha's business. As an outsider, you do not need to know or are permitted to know what any former citizen of Konoha has done. Just be on your way. Kauta frowned deeply, but Naruto perked up as he realized this was another of the man's varied feigned expressions. Then Kauta said, well, if that's the case, then as his traveling companion, I must be a suspect, too. But if I can't be told what his crime is, then this issue will have to be taken before the head of your village, the Hokage, I believe? At this, the ninjas could almost be heard grinding their teeth in frustration. Now that the sage had brought the Hokage into the conversation, they realized it would be no good to bar Naruto, for if the Hokage was made aware of the situation, he would obviously sanction Naruto's presence in the village. However, the obvious answer for the two of them was to simply deny Kauta's request. After all, they were the gate guards, and he was a simple traveler who wasn't even from Konoha. He had no right to question them. But the decision was taken away from them as a man wearing a Jounin vest that marked him as a ninja walked through the gates behind the two ninjas, reading a small book. With a quiet snap, the book was closed, revealing a shock of silver hair, a face masked from the nose down, and an almost bored expression. After his one visible eye scanned the four before him, both ninjas turned in surprise at the sight of a senior officer. Kakashi asked in a disinterested tone, well, what do we have here? Kakashi-san, the taller ninja asked in surprise. From where they stood, they couldn't see the slight smile that spread across Kauta's face as he saw the ninja. He once again adopted his look of confusion, saying, sorry, sir, but I'm just as confused as you. They stopped both me and the boy a few seconds ago. I know I'm not from this village, but I didn't think we'd beat. Hold on, we already said there were no issues, the taller ninja interjected, his voice rising to talk over Kauta, who was trying to explain the situation to Kakashi. Their clashing voices soon became an incomprehensible din as Kauta shouted louder, trying to drown out the taller ninja's words. A small, knowing grin crept across Naruto's face as he realized Kauta's plan. Nearby, the shorter ninja, who in his confusion had stopped glaring at Naruto, could only stare on bewilderedly while an obviously bored Kakashi simply rolled his eye. As the ninja and the traveler reached a state of hollering over each other, Kakashi let out one quiet, audible cough, which was almost lost in the loud racket. While Kauta had been expecting a signal, the taller ninja hadn't. So, when Kauta instantly stopped shouting, the walls of Konoha literally reverberated with the ninja's continued hollering. For the last time, there wasn't any bloody prob dash. His shouting came to a halt as he realized he had been bellowing like an idiot. Almost every villager, merchant, and even the lone beggar inside the Konoha gate were staring at him with curious expressions. Their stares were accompanied by Naruto's loud laughter as he pointed, amused by the sight of the bellowing ninja. The taller ninja stared at the laughing, whiskered boy in shock and dismay, while Kauta merely shrugged his shoulders. Well, with that out of your system, why don't we just call it a day? I'll take responsibility for the obviously suspicious-looking man in gaudy robes, and since the boy has been confirmed as a Konoha inhabitant, I don't see any problems. Job done, Kakashi announced as he turned around, reopened his book, and began to walk away. After a few steps, he paused, casting a disinterested glance back at Naruto. Naruto, you'd best go see Hokage-sama. No doubt he'll have important matters to sort out with you now that you've returned. With that, and an offhand wave, he resumed his walk. As the two ninjas stared dumbfounded at the quickly disappearing Jounin, Kauta whispered, and that, Naruto, is our cue to move on. Naruto finally got his laughter under control, beaming happily as he replied, "Right, Kautashishou," and quickly chased after the sage, who was calmly walking past Konoha's gates, humming a quiet tune. Behind them, two ninjas stood frozen, trying to figure out exactly what went wrong in their attempt to stop Naruto's return to the village. The door burst open with a bang, giving the old man his only warning before he was hit with a unique taijutsu technique that Kauta had dubbed the Blonde Missile during their travels. The impact nearly sent the Hokage, the most powerful ninja in all of Konoha, flying backward over his desk. As the old man stared down at the mass of blonde hair shouting "Ojii-san" into his midsection, Kauta calmly entered the room at a more relaxed pace, quietly taking a spot near the door to watch the encounter. "And Naruto-kun? Is that really you?" the Hokage finally managed to wheeze out, trying to catch his breath from the bone-crushing embrace he was in. As if to reply, Naruto looked up from his hug, his whiskered face beaming with obvious joy at the old man. "Yeah, it's me. I'm back now. I missed you so much, Ojii-san." The young boy's exuberant greeting instantly banished all of the Hokage's worries about what might have happened to Naruto in the years since he had last heard from him. A genuine smile broke across his features as he looked down endearingly at the boy's beaming face. After several more seconds of this, Naruto finally seemed to realize that he might be crushing the old man with his tight embrace. He quickly hopped away, laughing apologetically as the Hokage adjusted his hat that had been knocked askew, chuckling in good humor himself. "Well, Naruto, it's good to see you again. I'm a bit surprised to see you back so soon. Did you really manage to explore everything you possibly could in just 5 years?" the Hokage asked, leaning against the desk he had nearly been sent flying over moments before. "Well, no, not really, even though we traveled for so long. I had no idea the 5 nations were so massive. There was so much, I had to start writing things down to remember it all," Naruto replied with a happy smile, rummaging in one of his pant pockets before pulling out a tattered, battered, obviously well-used notebook. A scroll on its front cover, above the leaf symbol, read "The Great Uzumaki Naruto-sama's Chronicles." "Oh, I'd love to hear about everything you've done while you were gone, Naruto-kun," Sarutobi replied, eyeing the tattered notebook with an obvious gleam of interest in his wizened eyes. "But, like I was saying, isn't this a little soon for your return? I thought you would probably be at it for a good few more years, if not forever, if that lifestyle suited you." "No way, it was really fun, and I learned so many things and saw so many amazing sights. But if I'm going to be Hokage, then I wanted to start at the beginning, so I came back for the graduation," Naruto replied, pocketing the book as he adjusted the ties that held his Kodaki, which had slipped when he grabbed the Hokage. This movement was not lost on the Hokage, who eyed the sword with a hint of dislike, his eyes flicking to the man who watched silently nearby. Kauta, however, made no movement to respond, so Sarutobi looked back at Naruto before he could be noticed. "Well, Naruto, I think that's a brilliant idea, my lad. It's heartening to hear you wanted to start with the current generation of shinobi. Yes, it won't take much to get you enrolled in the academy in time for the test. So, would you like to see where you'll be studying?" "So, this is a ninja academy?" Kauta asked softly as the three of them wandered the academy halls. Naruto's gaze darted from wall to wall, classroom to classroom, picture to picture, an eager smile on his face as he took everything in. "Ah, of course, you've never seen one before, have you, Kauta-san?" Sarutobi asked as he walked alongside the sage, smoke trailing from the pipe he had been using as he happily watched the eager boy running ahead of them. "No, I have overseen some of the other villages' training rites, but they wouldn't let me near their training centers. Being a civilian has its drawbacks. In fact, I'm rather surprised you let me come along for this," Kauta answered softly as he peered through the open doorway of a classroom, his eyebrows raising in slight surprise at the significant number of children with bored expressions, barely listening to the Chuunin speaking at the front of the class. Sarutobi chuckled quietly at Kauta's use of the word civilian but didn't comment. Instead, he answered, "I thought you might be interested in seeing what he will be taught." "Hardly. He already knows everything any academy in the 5 nations could possibly teach him, and more so than many graduates. I made sure of that. This is simply a formality that he wishes to observe, but I respect his wishes," Kauta answered simply, almost bluntly, uncaring that he had just calmly insulted every educational institute in the entire known world. What was worse was that Sarutobi didn't even try to contradict him, instead pondering anew just what exactly Naruto had learned during his travels. "Is it this one, Ojii-san?" Naruto called back eagerly, standing beside and pointing up at the plaque that read 2C, waiting for the 2 slowly walking men to catch up. "Get your hands off Suzuki-kun." All 3 people in the corridor between classrooms almost fell over in shock from this loud shout that seemed to erupt from the classroom. The shout was somehow delivered by 2 distinctly different female voices at the same time and was accompanied by the sounds of chairs flying every which way and assorted jeers of "fight," "catfight," "Tenryo on Sakura," and various others almost chanted from within. "Both of you stop this instant," a loud voice added to the carnage within the room. Near the door, Naruto's smile widened to a Cheshire cat's as he started to pull on the classroom door, intent on jumping in to find out what the commotion was. However, Kauta suddenly moved forward without Naruto noticing. He instantly undid the strap around the kodaki tied to his back and removed the sword without Naruto's knowledge. As Naruto leapt into the classroom now without a sword, Sarutobi arched an eyebrow at Kouta's sudden decision. Kouta simply replied, bringing a sword into class is hardly good for first impressions, as he hid the kodaki alongside his own katana within the folds of his blue robes before walking in after his apprentice. The aged man simply sighed before following, where he narrowly avoided a flying chair to the face. He was disturbed as the two girls practically fell down the aisle between seats, all but a few of the other students hollering at the fight as a scar-faced sensei tried to stop the battle between a platinum blonde-haired girl in purple and a vivid pink-haired girl in red. Both girls wrestled as they screamed insults at one another. "Hey, is anybody else thinking?" who was the new kid by the door who walked in with Hokage-sama, a bored voice called out loudly from the back of the class. The comment was made by one of the few who weren't involved in the bets, a lazy-looking boy with a black spiky ponytail who was regarding Naruto with some slight interest. At the mention of their Hokage, everybody, the students, the sensei, and even the two girls who were halfway through putting each other in a headlock, froze and looked up toward the classroom door. "Quod erat demonstrandum," Kouta whispered from beside Sarutobi, referring to his earlier comment about how the academy wouldn't teach Naruto anything useful. He earned a stern look from the Hokage as Naruto smiled happily, exclaiming, "I'm liking the look of this class already, and I haven't even greeted anyone." Unnoticed by the smiling boy, he was quickly scanned by the collective students in the class. The females were the most affected. The boy's sunny smile, stylish blonde ponytail, impressive clothing, and confident bearing as he looked at them earned him 7 definite fans immediately. 12 couldn't decide between him and the other fan candidate, leaving a mere 2 firmly in the other contender's court, namely, the two girls who were still frozen in a headlock, staring at Naruto with annoyance for having disturbed their important battle for possession of the contender in question. Among the guys, there was comparatively less interest, with most of them annoyed that the catfight had been stopped. Among those who weren't involved, the boy with the ponytail had already lost interest, yawning before staring out the nearby window. The only other one, the boy in blue clothing with raven black hair, scrutinized him with a different look than any of the others, gauging his combat capabilities and whether he would prove to be a problem in the future. "Well, why don't you introduce yourself to the class?" Sarutobi asked the boy, interested to see what he would do. Naruto didn't fail to impress. His smile spread across his face at the request. With a single jump from the doorway, he cleared the entire distance to the desk where the sensei usually stood and landed on top of it. Everyone's eyes followed his sudden motion. With a deft move, he kicked up a stick of chalk from the desk, leaned over to the chalkboard, and rapidly scribbled an elaborate name across the board: "The Great Uzumaki Naruto-sama, future Hokage of Konoha." Dropping the chalk back down, he turned to face the entire class, arms crossed, and loudly announced, "The Great Uzumaki Naruto-sama has arrived. My interests are traveling, making new friends, exploring new places, and seeing the world. My likes are Ichiraku ramen, Kouta shishao, instant ramen, Aji-san, any other type of ramen, all the friends I made as I traveled, and cool-looking swords. Oh, and gardening, although I haven't really had the chance to try since I've been traveling for so long. My one goal is to become the greatest Hokage ever." Nearby, Sarutobi chuckled quietly at the declaration, while Kouta rubbed his eyes in exasperation, realizing that he should have let Naruto keep the sword, since on his own he had single-handedly made himself look and sound like an idiot. For a while, the entire class sat in silence, trying to digest, or at least comprehend, half of the things he had confidently shouted at them. Sure, some of it had sounded rather impressive. After all, an interest in traveling the world was impressive no matter how it was said. If only he hadn't called himself Great Uzumaki-sama, it would have been an impressive introduction. That, and the copious references to ramen. The scarred teacher recovered first, clapping his hands together loudly. "Well, it's nice to meet you, too, Naruto," he said, hesitating only for a second to make sure he didn't repeat the gaudy title Naruto had given himself before continuing. "I'm Irika, your new classroom teacher. Now, the seat behind Suzuki is free, the one beside where Ino is meant to be sitting." The last part was deliberately shouted out at the two girls still halfway in headlocks, who instantly let each other go, muttering insults at each other as they returned to their respective seats. The platinum blonde one sat beside the empty seat, instantly identifying her to Naruto as the girl named Ino, and the boy in blue diagonally in front of her as Suzuki. The pink-haired one returned to her seat on the far end of Suzuki's row, glaring daggers back at Ino as the platinum blonde girl responded in force. Naruto nodded once, looking down at the sensei from where he stood on the desk. "So that's going to be my seat, is it, Irika-sensei?" As Irika nodded in return, Naruto beamed before vanishing. Or so it seemed to the shocked students. Naruto had leapt high into the air above their heads in the high-ceiling classroom, spinning in midair as he flipped himself to face the board's direction before landing with a solid thump on the desk where he was to be seated, disturbing Ino's book and making it fall to the floor. As everyone simply gaped slack-jawed at him, Naruto jumped lightly off the desk, landing in his seat with a bright smile, as if everything he just did was what he considered normal. However, he cried out slightly in dismay for an inexplicable reason, although Kouta knew why. As Naruto searched around him in dismay, he coughed quietly, causing Naruto to turn his head at breakneck speed in his direction. With a slight movement, part of his pale blue robes moved aside, and a tiny fraction of the pommel from Naruto's kodaki poked out from the folds before being quickly hidden away. With relief, Naruto smiled once more before quickly reaching down, grabbing the book that had fallen, then looking back up with an apologetic smile to his new neighbor, nervously offering the book with a quiet sorry. After a few seconds, the girl seemed to get over the shock, grabbing the book out of his hands with an annoyed glance and slamming it back onto her own desk. With that slam, it seemed that time resumed once more in the class. Everybody but a select few turned back to the front of the classroom, in particular Sasuke, who glared darkly out of the corner of his eye up at Naruto, realizing that he would have to re-evaluate what he thought the blonde would be capable of. "Well, shall we be off, Kauta-san?" Sarutobi asked as he turned toward the door. But Kauta instead moved toward Irika, smiling amicably. "Sorry to trouble you, but as Naruto's guardian, I'd like to know what the training and class schedules are for Naruto. Could you tell me?" Irika seemed to hesitate, looking at the Hokage as if to confirm whether he should tell Kauta anything. Sarutobi quickly nodded, smiling slightly as he realized that Kauta was still interested in Naruto's welfare, not merely here as a formality, before vanishing as he had the last time he'd appeared in the village. "Well, Monday through Thursday are all class lectures, where they'll learn about the different types of chakra control, different jutsus, Kekai Genkai, and how to recognize and neutralize the most common ones, the history of Konoha and its Hokage, among many others. Friday is when we do all the practical classes, sparring, and practice with shuriken and kunao." "Nani? We only do practical once a week," Naruto suddenly shouted from his seat in shock, causing every person within 3 seats in any direction to clap their hands over their ears to protect their eardrums. Sarutobi's eyes widened in shock, but not so much at Naruto's shout. He could have predicted that Naruto, like any child, would scream about having 4 lessons of lectures, but not for him to choose the flip side argument about the lack of practical instead. Once again, he could only glance in wonder at Kauta, at what he could have done to make any child forget to complain about an excess of lectures, and instead complain about a lack of training time. "That's troubling to hear," Kauta said with real concern. "Naruto is used to physical training for an hour or 2 every day. Is there any place he can practice sparring with his classmates?" "I'm afraid not," Irika answered hesitantly, while the boy let out another cry of dismay. He could try to find a sparring partner and practice outside of class, but besides that, no. "To be honest, we never expected such a complaint to come up." Kauta thought for a while, then turned to Naruto and smiled reassuringly, promising, "Don't worry, you can always continue your physical training with me in your free time." Naruto seemed to consider this for a bit before smiling widely and replying, "Asu." Sarutobi could only shake his head, chuckling as he said, "Well, shall we go, Kauta?" Kauta nodded in reply, waving goodbye to Naruto, who responded enthusiastically in kind before they left. As soon as the door closed, Kauta said only one thing, ever so quietly: "A place to talk, where nobody will interrupt." As they stood silently near the memorial of those who had died in the Kyuubi's attack on Konoha, the sky was dark and foreboding, heavy with clouds. The grounds were deserted for miles in every direction, and neither sage nor Hokage could detect any hidden ninja's chakra. Kauta finally dropped his act. "Hiruzen, you have a lot to explain," Kauta said quietly, but no longer in his soft tones. That harsh flintiness was back as he directed his words at the Hokage beside him without looking. As if in response, Sarutobi lifted the hat from his head, the sign of his official office, and placed it down on the memorial before them. His movements were weary as he answered, "It has been a long time since anyone called me by that name. Nobody has since I took this office decades ago, no one, except for you. Whomever calls you by whatever name they wish does not concern me," Kauta replied harshly, yet with quiet restraint. His eyes bored into the Hokage's in suppressed rage. "You owe me an answer, one that has been 5 years in the making, and one I will have now." "How? How could the man I knew, the greatest ninja in Konoha, the man who swore to bring about an unparalleled age of peace, dare to fail a person so badly? I already know the weight he bears, but the Hokage, Hiruzen Sarutobi, the man I once knew, would never have let such an innocent child suffer so, be he a monster, a hero, or just a plain normal child. Tell me, Hiruzen. And I swear this, if it doesn't satisfy me, if you don't have a refutable reason for what you have failed to do, or if you dared let prejudice cloud your judgment as the villagers did, then only one of us will leave here tonight. Either my journey will end, or yours shall." The old man didn't even shudder or react to these words, the death threat vowed by the sage whose gaze pierced him as surely as any blade could. There wasn't even a hint of surprise that the sage had so easily announced his knowledge of the Kyuubi sealed within Naruto. The only thing that filled the old man's heart was remorse as he turned to the stone and laid a hand softly upon the engravings, quietly saying, "This was the reason. All of those who perished by the claws of the monster that now is sealed within the young child. Kauta-san, tell me, what else could I do? No matter how much I knew in my heart that the child was innocent, I could not make the villagers see the truth, no matter how hard I tried." "You know my answer," you should have made them listen. Kauta almost shouted back, no longer able to suppress himself as he violently swiped his arm through the space between them. His features were twisted in anger as he shouted back, you should have made it clear that there was to be no tolerance of mistreatment to the boy. If you had made it clear from the beginning, then the villagers would have respected your decision. You are their Hokage. However, Sarutobi sadly shook his head, refuting Kauta's challenge. He replied quietly, whatever I would have done to protect the child would have only caused more problems. No matter what you may wish or say, the villagers could not forgive and forget the many deaths that the Kyuubi caused. For those who hated him, they would have done everything they could to harm him. I hate with all my heart that this is so, but if I had restricted everything, who's to say they would not have, in desperation to get revenge, revealed the secret to those outside this village? So you're justifying their acts as the lesser of two evils. Kauta-san, you know how this world works more so than any other man alive. Can you imagine what would have happened if it were ever discovered by another village that within the walls of Konoha, there was a child, young and defenseless, who harbored the might of the strongest Baijiu in existence? Those from Kumagakur were more than willing to infiltrate Konoha time and again in their attempts to obtain the Byakugan of the Hyuga. Could you imagine what lengths they would go to get their hands on Naruto? It was the judgment of the Council of Konoha that stayed my hand from helping the child, and for the boy's own safety as much as the safety of the villagers, I could not go against their judgment. Kauta's fists clenched in anger as he turned slightly away from the Hokage with what could best be described as a hiss of annoyance and frustration. He could hear the sense in the old man's reasons, but couldn't bring himself to agree with it. He couldn't hold back his anger at those who had hurt Naruto. He wanted to vent his fury on anything, everything. For a moment, he turned around rapidly, drawing his fist back as he made to strike the stone monolith before him, the memorial that was as much a testament to the suffering of the village as it was a testament to the numerous grudges the villagers unfairly took out upon the young child. Sarutobi didn't even try to stop him, watching wearily as Kauta struggled with the anger inside him, knowing that as much as the sage's emotional fury was bad, the reason for Kauta's fury was the same as his own guilt, at being unable to do anything for Naruto. However, with a deep breath, Kauta's arm was lowered, his head also lowering down with it. I just can't stand it, Hiruzen, Kauta finally said after minutes of silence. His voice was soft once more, yet filled with a sad emotion that was easy to hear. That such an innocent-hearted boy had to suffer so. I knew this was the most likely explanation. I'm no fool, but I still hate it all the same. As he said this, the Hokage put an arm out, reaching across Kauta's shoulders as if to reassure him. He sadly replied, I know, Kauta-san, I know, and I truly regret it all the more for it. But as the leader, as the Hokage, I had to do what was best for the village and for his sake, even if it put him through suffering that no child should have had to go through. Every day I wish I could have gone back to that night and undone what I did, to have never revealed Naruto's existence as the Kyuubi's container. If I had only had the foresight to know how the villagers would have reacted, I would have never let the village know. As the wind slowly blew past the pair of men, there was silence as they both regarded the memorial before them, a stray leaf dancing in the air as they stood. After some time, what could easily have been an age for the two who stood silently, they both started to walk away together, two old, world-weary men in robes walking side by side. Even if only one of them wore their age and experiences so clearly, the man in white robes' movements were slightly stiff, his back slightly bent, compared to the man in blue who stood tall and walked smoothly. Yet the expressions they bore would make a perceptive person perhaps wonder who was truly the older of the two. As they walked, the clouds finally broke, a ray of sunlight illuminating their way. The older of the two raised his head at the single piercing beam of light before smiling slightly, murmuring as he walked, you know, Kauta-san, every moment I could find spare, every arrangement I could make a little shorter, I spent with the boy. I know, Kauta replied quietly as they walked. His head also turned up to the sky as he folded his hands over one another behind his back, adding, they were his fondest and most precious memories. He would always tell me about the times he spent with you, a brilliant smile across his face as he recounted in great detail everything he could. The old man chuckled slightly at the response before saying, it was good of you to send that message ahead of your intended time to return. Kakashi had been milling about the gate to Konoha all day, awaiting Naruto's return since I gave him the order to make sure you got in safely. Yes, about that. What is that man's connection to Naruto? When I asked Naruto, he seemed to know nothing about any Umbu with silver hair. So how come he always seems to be watching over the boy? Kauta asked. All in good time, Kauta-san, it is something that you should ask him, not I. But I will say he cares for the boy as much as you or I, if not more. So, just how much did you manage to teach Naruto during his travels? Teach him? Very little, Kauta replied, earning a surprised look from the Hokage. As a smile finally started to creep across his face once more, Kauta continued, everything he learned by seeing it with his own eyes, experiencing it with his own body. There was very little I actually instructed him in, other than the way of the sword. Yes, I noticed that sword, if I may, Sarutobi asked, proffering one gnarled hand. Nodding, Kauta unclasped his hands from behind his back, reaching into the recesses of his robes before drawing out the dark blue sheath of the Kodaki he had taken from Naruto. Taking the sheath in hand, he pointed the sword handle to the old man, who drew the blade, the metal ringing out clearly as the sword was drawn smoothly from the sheath. Raising the short sword before him, the Hokage scrutinized the blade, admiring the obvious high quality of the sword's make before smiling slightly as he read the history of the sword through the nicks and scratches along the blade edge. This blade that Naruto bore was no killer, it had yet to be bathed in blood, although the numerous nicks and marks showed that it had seen a lot of use. However, the lack of dirt and the smooth shine of the metal, alongside the unscuffed sheath that he could see clearly in Kaota's hands, showed its owner cared for his blade meticulously. It's a beautiful sword, one that Naruto should be glad to bear, Sarutobi spoke softly, smiling slightly as with practiced movements he directed the blade back home, sliding it back into its sheath, that suba clinking slightly as it met the metal about the opening of the sheath. Kaota quickly stored the blade back within the recesses of his light blue robes, answering, indeed. After a certain, encounter in one of the villages surrounding Kirigakure that was fortunate in some ways, and unfortunate in others, Naruto was taken by the beauty of the way of the sword, and begged me to teach him. He is an apt student, but his excitable nature and boundless energy mean he cannot use the same Raiwu as me, he shall need to create his own way. The Hokage chuckled at that. To say that Naruto was excitable was probably a massive understatement. So, aside from Kenjutsu, what else has the boy learned? Did you teach him any of the jutsu he would require for the shinobi exam? Yes and no. Do explain, Sarutobi asked curiously, wondering just what the enigmatic words meant. Kaota laughed softly and replied before continuing, besides from the very basics, there was little I could teach him, for I am fully aware just how inadequate a teacher I am for the shinobi arts. Many of the techniques and jutsu he learned, he inherited from those we met in our travels who were willing to pass their knowledge on to him. However, as his first mentor, I noticed that Naruto himself posed an intriguing challenge. The boy has a marvelous reservoir for chakra, far more so than any child I have seen of his age, or of many ninja in total. And with it, I am proud to say he has mastered a veritable range of techniques in jutsu. I would say that in chakra capacity alone, he surpasses an average jounin rank ninja, and his capacity only keeps increasing with the years that pass. But with that, he lacks the control needed to use minor jutsu effectively. The Hokage stroked his chin in contemplation as he considered just what this meant, but his brows raised slightly as he remembered the last part of Kaota's words. Minor jutsu. Yes, Kaota confirmed with a nod, once again clasping his hands behind his back as he explained, he can control chakra effectively when it comes to vast quantities, but it seems he cannot when you bring it down to academy-level jutsu. I have tried teaching him every chakra control method I knew: meditation, tree climbing, water walking, even real combat exercises and multiple jutsu control under such situations as fighting on water, but to little avail. It was lucky for the Hokage that Kaota was watching the sky still, for he did not see the look of pure disbelief that flashed across the old man's features, nor the stumble as in his lack of concentration. The old man nearly tripped on a badly placed stone. The exercises that Kaota had calmly explained having taught Naruto were normally withheld from Konoha's prospective graduates until their second year of being a genin. Even the talented ones never learned these skills before becoming genin, for no normal person would have the chakra reserves capable to use them. I guess that must be the Kyuubi's influence on the boy, or is it his inheritance from his parents? Sarutobi mused silently, almost missing Kaota's continued explanation as he said, eventually, he managed to get enough control to use two of what I would consider the three essentials, Kawarimi and Henge. But no matter what I tried, he could not master Bunshin. However, after that encounter I described to you earlier, the ninja we encountered passed on some of his techniques to Naruto, one of them proving an adequate replacement for his inability to use Bunshin. Sarutobi nodded slowly as he finally got over the shock of what Kaota had told him. As he did so, he mentally listed the required jutsu for passing the academy exam, and besides the chance that Bunshin would come up on the exams, what Kaota had told him sounded promising. So, he can use Kawarimi and Henge. But what do you mean by a replacement for Bunshin? Uzumaki Naruto, you will pay attention in class or Kami help me, you will be in detention for the rest of your life. An irate Irika shouted across the classroom. The vast majority of the other students hid sniggers as they looked at the blonde-haired boy at his desk, his forehead on the table, a pool of drool starting to spread from where his mouth was as his snores practically rang out across the classroom. However, that stopped immediately with a cry of surprise as Naruto suddenly awoke from his stupor, grabbing onto his desk as his chair started to fall backwards from the sudden movement of sitting bolt upright at the sensei's shouted words. But Irika-sensei, it's all really boring stuff. Naruto whined as he finally regained his balance, the front two legs of his chair clattering off the classroom floor as he finally sat back in place. Besides, I already know everything you said we'd be talking about, so why can't I just sleep? What kind of idiot do you think your sensei is, Naruto? Do you really think I believe that excuse? Irika said quietly, seemingly calmly, but the twitching eyebrow along with the threatening to explode vein that stretched across his forehead was daring Naruto to try and say anything back. Naruto simply frowned in response, replying, but I do know all about the four Hokages, what they're famous for, their jutsu dash. Like hell I believe you. Irika almost roared back, picking up a stick of chalk from his desk before throwing it full force in Naruto's direction, aimed perfectly at the defiant boy's forehead. As it got closer, any person who could see fast enough would realize that Naruto's eyes were widening rather than wincing shut as the missile flew at maximum speed for him. Normally, if a missile flew at someone, they would try and dodge or brace, but the boy was seemingly afraid of it, as if he realized something was about to be revealed to the class. In desperation, he tried to avoid the missile. But Iruka's aim was true, and Naruto's reaction was half a heartbeat too late, as the chalk solidly impacted with the boy's head, instantly causing the boy's head to be flung backwards with the force of the impact. Was about the only response from the boy before he exploded. Literally. The girl beside him, Ino, screamed out in surprise and shock as she was splashed with liquid all over, instantly drenching her from head to toe. Sasuke in front also got covered, his blue clothes turning darker as they soaked up liquid from whatever had just flown from the spot Naruto had previously been sitting at. About 7 others also suffered from the explosion, splashes of a clear liquid flying at them, but Sasuke and Ino definitely suffered the worst of it. Water. A torrential downpour of it. Everybody in the class who had not suffered from the sudden deluge from Naruto's previous vicinity was just staring dumbly at the now empty seat. Even Iruka couldn't tear his wide-eyed gaze from the spot, even as his mind lamely told him that somehow, by some method, Naruto had not only managed to use a C-rank Mizu Bunshin jutsu without him noticing, but had somehow managed to escape the classroom, leaving a sleeping clone in his seat. It took only a few seconds, but eventually the classroom was filled with a cacophony of shouts, of laughter from some pupils, of dismay from those who were soaked, of downright anger from 2 girls in particular, Ino at her own absolutely soaked clothing and hair, Sakura from the same reasons, but instead in outrage that her beloved Sasuke had been soaked. Sasuke only quietly fumed, already wanting his revenge against the idiot that had made a mockery of him. But above all of this, was one loud bellowing shout from the sensei up front. Naruto. In the academy's playground, one lone boy, blonde hair trailing behind him as he swung from the playground swing, beaming happily at a time at odds with the time that most children would be in class, winced slightly as he heard the echoing roar from the classroom, before quietly chuckling to himself, his only reaction to push off the ground harder as he tried to swing as high up as he could. Unbeknownst to even the boy who swung happily from the swing, a soul gazed at him from the rooftop of the building nearby. Under the mask the ninja wore a smile that spread across his face, chuckling quietly at the antics of the child below him. With a quick flick of his wrist, he reopened the book he always carried with him, turning away from the child as he vanished with the Shunshin Jutsu, nothing but a swirl of leaves left in his wake. How much longer was the only thought slogging through Naruto's mind as he desperately tried to avoid the invitation to sleep that the incredibly boring lesson was giving him, now firmly back in the classroom and being forced to listen to Iruka drone on at the front of the classroom. After his previous escapade had been discovered, it hadn't taken long for Iruka to find him, someone from the class having seen him playing on the swings from the windows of the classroom and instantly grossed on him. Give the sensei credit, he's fast. Naruto thought blearily, fighting off a yawn as he remembered the short time between that horrible sixth sense of danger kicking in, turning his head slowly from where he swung and seeing a boy's finger pointing at him from the classroom window, and the time when he had his ear painfully clamped between finger and thumb, getting dragged painfully back to the classroom by the scar-faced sensei. He had never even seen the furious teacher go from the front of the class, to the open window, to the open grounds and to the swing, only aware of the sharp pain as he was grabbed and the bellowing shouting almost tearing his eardrums as Iruka had started his tirade. Now that he had been successfully returned to that classroom, he didn't dare try to repeat the same trick again. After all, Iruka was a Chuunin, and Naruto doubted the Mizu Bunshin would work a second time. While he still had several other plans to escape lessons stored in his thoughts, his current situation wasn't exactly safe enough to proceed with any, due to Iruka's surprisingly effective countermeasure. Even now, as he gingerly reached a hand towards his right side which had recently become quite sore, he glanced nervously at his neighbor. Earlier, when Iruka had practically frog-marched him back to his seat, Iruka had given him a rather scary smile, one that had sent shivers up the blonde boy's spine. At first, he didn't understand the meaning of the smile. After all, his previous teacher had been a patient man, and one more than willing to adjust his lessons to keep Naruto's interest in the lessons he taught as they walked. Kauta had never needed to resort to a drastic or particularly self-satisfying plan to keep Naruto in check. As Iruka had walked away smiling still, Naruto's danger instinct started to kick in as Iruka spoke loudly to the whole class. Now, Naruto, as this is perhaps your very first lesson in a classroom environment, and you were perhaps unaware that you don't ditch classes when you are bored, I will, and I stress this time only, let this little joke slide. At these words, there was a mixture of responses from the students. Cry of outrages were specifically loud from his nearby neighbors, Naruto clapping his hands over his ears in pain and surprise from the vehemently loud cry of outrage from Ino beside him, followed shortly by a glare from her direction that would have killed any lesser man, only slightly belittled by the humorous single drip of water from her still slightly damp ponytail that had suffered from the earlier deluge of water all thanks to him. In his defense, Naruto did feel a little guilty that he had soaked his new neighbor before he even had the chance to introduce himself, even if, for some reason Naruto couldn't fathom, Ino happened to have kept a spare set of identical clothing to her first set, so the purple clothes she wore were no longer soaked. However, guilty or not, he couldn't help but edge away in fear from that murderous gleam in her eyes. At the front of the class, Irika seemed patient enough now to wait as the mixed cries of confusion, outrage, and in one or two cases a quiet cheer in that the newly dubbed class prankster had gotten away with what he did started to drown everything out. After these had died down, the majority of the class started watching Irika again, but with 7 people now giving Naruto murderous glances from nearby, although none still as intense or particularly scary looking as the platinum blonde girl beside him. Funnily enough, despite being numbered as one of the 7 Naruto's exploded Mizu Bunshin had soaked, and being the second worst hit excepting Ino, Sasuke did not partake in this death glaring. Instead he was seemingly contemplating something in silence as he looked at Irika intently for an inexplicable reason. No, his position amongst the 7 death glares had been taken by Sakura, who had already snapped the pencil in her grip in her outrage at Naruto escaping punishment for soaking her beloved Sasuke. Clapping his hands lightly to regain all of the students' attention, that strangely dangerous smile still gracing his features as he watched Naruto with a wicked gleam in his eyes, Irika started to continue. However, it also seems that you may have a problem with remaining alert in class. It would be a problem if you missed anything important that will come up on the Genin exam, as such I will give responsibility for keeping you alert to a fellow student. With this, Naruto finally realized what Irika may have had planned for him, and had speeded up his attempt to retreat from his neighbor's glare, finding to his dismay that he had ran out of desk to shift along to escape the reach he estimated the kunoichi might have. Smiling cheerfully, Irika announced, "Ino, since you sit beside Naruto, I will leave it as your responsibility to keep him alert in lesson." Beside him, Ino tensed up in anger, opening her mouth to voice her protest for easily the 100th time that day. However, Irika added one last phrase that stopped her protest instantly. "By any means you deem necessary." And now, half an hour after that announcement, Naruto was gingerly holding the side of his jacket, remembering all the times Ino had thought he needed help keeping alert, having promptly, and with a very satisfied expression, jabbed her pen right between his ribs, eliciting a howl from the boy time and again, which Irika conveniently ignored alongside all the sniggers of their classmates. Even though he wore armor underneath his jacket, by some twist of fate or some sarcastic Kami's intervention, that pen had found the gap between the rings and the chain link every time, and Naruto was suffering greatly for his earlier joke. Even now, as he glanced nervously at her, she seemed to notice his look, that earlier glare of ire now replaced by a mischievous smile as she took pen from paper and slowly spun it between her fingers as if to make a statement to him once more, causing him to wince and shy away. If it hadn't been for the fact it was aimed at him, Naruto would have normally liked this change in the girl's attitude as he quickly came to realize his next seat neighbor was actually stunningly attractive. Her long blonde hair, so much lighter a color than his own, fell the entire way down her back in a ponytail, long bangs falling just over the right side of her face, which was amazingly attractive as well, her features sharp with a slightly exotic look. Her clothes also revealed a lot, several parts of the purple clothes laying open, with bandages tightly wrapped around her body instead, although leaving her shoulders bare. To top it off, she had stunning light blue eyes, which right now were lit with that mischievous light in her plans to get revenge on him. Were it not for that last bit about the revenge on him for soaking her, he would have been very glad to have the seat beside this beauty, but right now he wanted to be on the opposite side of the class, preferably with a good few inches of steel between himself, the platinum blonde and that oh-so-painful pen. How much longer? Naruto thought again desperately, still trying to fight off the boredom, trying to keep his features attentive lest his neighbor use it as the excuse to stab him in the ribs again. As if to answer this prayer, at the front of the class Irika finally stopped droning on, instead clapping his hands as he announced, "Okay everyone, let's break for lunch." "Yahoo!" Naruto shouted out in cheer, punching the air almost in victory, half surprised as he watched a boy in a furry hoodie at the back of the class mimic his movements almost in synchrony with him. "Seems I'm not the only guy who gets bored to death here," Naruto thought in the back of his head, his thoughts more centered on getting out of the classroom as fast as he can, already leaping towards the partially open window as behind him Irika shouted out, "Don't you dare try ditching classes, Naruto, I expect you back in here within the hour." However, getting no reply, Irika ran over to the window as the rest of the students used the more normal exit of the doorway, a couple of them sniggering at Naruto's antics as they left. Looking out, he saw the boy practically rolling around in the grass with a massive grin on his whiskered face, laughing loudly as he enjoyed himself like any other kid of his age. Pulling back from the windowsill, Irika rubbed his face in weary resignation, wondering would he be able to keep a hold of his sanity long enough to reach the exams. As he lay in the grass, enjoying the feel of the sun shining down and the breeze tugging at his hair, Naruto was wondering the exact same thoughts as his sensei. "Man, I didn't imagine it would be so boring," Naruto grumbled quietly as he remembered the class. During the times he could actually manage listening to Irika drone on everything the sensei said he had already heard once before from his previous mentor. But while sitting in that classroom had been stifling and boring, Naruto had never once had to do so with Kauta. Often they had spoken around the open campfire, the the sage often using examples of what they had recently seen as examples for his lessons, showing the relations of the elements through actual practice, using something as simple as fanning the campfire with a large leaf to explain the complicated connections in elemental collaboration jutsus. "What was so boring?" a voice asked from nearby, surprising Naruto out of his reverie as he sat bolt upright, instinct to flee kicking in already, a minor part of his mind surprised as hell that he had gained a conditioned instinct to escape from the one who owned that voice. Looking about sharply, he soon found the source of the voice leaning against the trunk of the tree the playground swing hung from. The lesson," Naruto replied nervously, hoping against hope that this person wasn't about to attack him or something, anything to get vengeance for soaking her earlier. However, judging from her rather relaxed posture as she leaned against the tree, it seemed the half hour of stabbing him repeatedly with a pen had been enough to assuage her rage as Ino watched him curiously with his bright eyes. "So you soaked me in Suzuki-kun because you were bored? Crap, she's still mad," Naruto realized as he started to nervously edge away from the girl in purple, once again underestimating that complicated thing called the female mind as Ino pushed off from the tree and started walking towards him. Naruto was about a fraction of a second of scrambling up and bolting from her, but instead of doing anything, the girl simply crouched down level with him, tucking her arms around her knees as she asked, "Were you being serious?" "Ha!" Naruto blurted out in confusion, freezing in place at the sudden change in tone from the girl. Ino rolled her eyes in exasperation, muttering something under her breath that sounded suspiciously like an insult about how dumb a person could be, before continuing, "I said, were you being serious? All that stuff about traveling around the world." "Ah, yeah, of course. Yeah, want to know about it?" Naruto replied eagerly, relaxing slightly as he realized he wasn't about to be attacked again, sitting back in a cross-legged pose as his massive grin returned in full force. Ino raised a brow skeptically, but didn't stop herself from joining the blonde on the grass, sitting down on the grass as well, signaling to the boy that he had a listener, even if she was seemingly skeptical of whatever he might say. For the next while as the sun shined down on both teller and listener, Naruto cheerfully regaled a mere fraction of the time he had spent away from Konoha, the first few months that he could remember when Kauta had first started their travels. Even though it had been easily 5 years ago and most memories from that long ago had been nearly lost to his thought, their only record in the series of tatty journals he kept in his pack, there was no way he would ever forget his first impressions of the real world outside of Konoha, that first taste of freedom that his new mentor had shown him. As he spoke, Ino could barely keep the surprise from showing on her face. Naruto's story was simply astounding, the way he fondly spoke of each and every memory with such perfect clarity, she could almost paint the places he had been within her mind. She wasn't the only one either. Naruto was lost in the telling of his tale, locations and places painted with such cheery yet powerful emphasis, and Ino absorbed in the story that Naruto weaved that neither noticed a third, hesitant presence nearby, an eavesdropper with pure white eyes wide with something akin to adoration at the teller of the amazing tale. Even though he was immersed deeply with his story, Naruto still was cautious about what he spoke of, and didn't once speak of those Kauta and he had met, those mercenaries, fellow travelers, and even ninja whom they had met on their travels. Instead, he focusing his tales on the details of the places they had gone, the intense heat from the sun that seemed to burn in the sky above the desert sands they had traversed, the tranquil peace amongst the animals at the undisturbed pools where they had stopped to get fresh water, the intense crowds within the massive bazaars and villages which the listening students had never even heard of in their lives. It was about then that I accidentally set his pack on fire. Kauta Shisha wasn't happy at all with that, not at all, Naruto said after a while, shivering slightly despite the rather warm weather as he remembered what happened after that. Back in the Hokage's office, a certain man in blue's eyebrows shot up in surprise, turning his head to look out the wide window to the town below, his gaze zoning in on the ninja academy in the distance, taking his attention away from the elderly man before him who had only moments prior been in conversation with him. As Sarutobi noticed the sudden lack of attention from the sage, he coughed discreetly. "Oh, my bad," Kauta asked, turning back to the Hokage and refocusing on the present moment. Sarutobi let out a small chuckle, saying wryly, "If I'm boring you at all, Kauta-san, please, do tell." Kauta shook his head, his gaze drifting back to the window as he said softly, almost thoughtfully, "Oh, it's not that, I just recalled a rather funny memory, though I'm not sure what brought it on." Sarutobi laughed at that, replying, "Oh come now, Kauta-san, you're far too young to be getting senile." Kauta shrugged in response, looking back at the old man with a smile. "Now," the Hokage continued, bending his frail body to sit at his desk once more. He quickly opened one of the many drawers, rummaged around for a moment, and then pulled out an incredibly thick file. After closing the drawer, he dropped the file on the desk and continued, "Since you gave me a heads up, I was able to handle a few things beforehand. I've taken the liberty of arranging some new accommodations for Naruto-kun, something a bit more spacious than before." Kauta nodded as Sarutobi managed to separate the correct documents from the file, handing him a small pamphlet for a new flat. As his eyes scanned the document, Kauta murmured, "This looks quite new." "Indeed," the Hokage said with a smile, before explaining, there were recent expansions to the housing sector due to a shortage, so it was relatively easy to acquire one for Naruto's use. However, Kauta looked up at the hesitation in Sarutobi's voice, having just finished reading the pamphlet. The old man seemed to be struggling to say something, and Kauta had a pretty good idea what it was. If it was what he suspected, he had no issue with it, but for his own amusement, he decided to play along. I just noticed this flat is for 2 residents, Hiruzen, Kauta said softly, causing the old man to flinch slightly. Coughing to cover it up, the old man replied, yes, about that. For official reasons, the tenants' names are required on the deeds. Now, for Naruto's safety and privacy, it would be best if no official documents have his name on them, and it would raise suspicion if I signed them myself, so, Kauta continued slowly, noticing the light sweat on the old man's brow and hiding the hint of a smile that threatened to break through. His guess had been spot on. Swallowing nervously, the man known as the strongest ninja in all of Konoha was in a cold sweat at having to tell the man before him the truth. So, the deeds are signed not in his name, but in yours, the Hokage said in a single rush, watching the man opposite him nervously. What was left unsaid was that this meant that as a non-villager, Kauta would have to physically be a tenant and live in the building for it to remain in his name. This meant that Kauta, the wandering sage, would no longer be able to leave Konoha. If he did, the deed would no longer be valid, and Naruto would have nowhere to live. His days of travel would be over. So, without my permission, you have tied me down? You have forced me to be bound to this village for Naruto's sake? Kauta asked slowly and quietly, his eyes opening more than their usual fraction, revealing a piercing sky-blue gaze, a sure sign of his building emotions. The Hokage braced himself, fully expecting his office to become a maelstrom from the reaction of the man before him. After several tense seconds, Kauta smiled widely, his eyes returning to normal as he spread his hands in a broad gesture, replying, that's what I had planned anyway. The Hokage literally deflated, sinking back into his chair as his body lost its tension. He wiped a hand over his eyes as a small smile spread across his face, saying, Kauta-san, you're giving this old heart too much of a workout. I half expected you to attack me there. Kauta laughed softly in return, replying, come on, old friend, you're not old enough for a joke like this to get you so worked up. If only you knew. Sarutobi thought sadly, feeling every year of his life in his weary bones. It had been a long time since a young man, barely old enough to be worthy of the title, and a Hokage first met and somehow became friends. Perhaps Kauta was unaware of just how harsh the impact of time could be, with his relative youth compared to the old man who now sat wearily before him. Hiruzen, Kauta asked softly, his eyebrows raised in surprise at the sudden lapse in the old man's attention. The Hokage quickly shook off his dark, melancholic mood, indicating for Kauta to continue. Well, I already plan to stay here until Naruto achieves his goal of becoming Hokage. I have an interest in seeing what he will do with this village. I want to witness what he can achieve, Kauta explained, gesturing casually toward the view from the windows. He finished, when he has attained his dream, I shall return to my travels once more, but until then, I'll be relying on your hospitality, Hokage-san. Sarutobi nodded in return, smiling warmly at how well things had gone. He had expected at the very least a fierce argument to settle the issue, but not only did Kauta agree, he did so willingly. However, Sarutobi braced himself once more, for it was inevitable that this next question would cause a confrontation. Just in case, Hiruzen raised his hands into the seal of the rat, using a small amount of chakra to activate the privacy seals in his office, designed to keep all noise from being heard outside. With the preparations made, the Hokage took a deep breath before saying, there is one more issue. Surprise flashed across Kauta's face. He assumed since he had already agreed to stay in the village there could be no greater problem that would require his attention. However, he waited patiently as the Hokage steeled himself, before finally saying, in order to remain as Naruto's guardian, to stop the council from trying to separate you two, you will be required to join Konoha as a ninja. For a long time, there was silence between the two. The Hokage stared at the sage in complete silence. Downstairs, the Hokage's personal secretary was in a surprisingly good mood as she drank her coffee. Thanks to the guest, the Hokage had given her an extended break from her duties. For the last hour, she hadn't been required to do any sorting, filing, or arranging meetings. It was an incredibly rare break, and she was enjoying it to the fullest. Her only order was to make sure nobody disturbed the Hokage unless it was urgent. But this beautifully calm moment was ruined as she suddenly winced in pain. After a second, however, she realized she couldn't for the life of her think why. It was as if she had heard somebody scream unbelievably loudly, as if her ears had been almost blown out by the volume. However, try as she might, she couldn't hear anything other than the faint sound of the wind blowing past the shutters in the nearby window. You're serious? He does nothing but eat constantly. Naruto laughed as he grinned widely, listening to the tales told to him by the blonde girl now sitting beside him, who was also laughing as she tried to continue talking. After he had gotten bored of telling his stories, much to his audience of two's disappointment, Naruto had begged the girl to tell him what the rest of their classmates were like, desperate to catch up as fast as he could. Fortunately for him, it seemed Ino was the class gossip, and although much of what she said went over his head, he was steadily starting to memorize what he wanted to know. Yeah, he literally can't go more than a minute without eating something. I mean, just look, Ino said, pointing toward the opposite side of the playground. Following her motion, Naruto burst out laughing again as, indeed, only about 30 meters away, there was the Akimichi with a massive bag of potato chips, munching eagerly even as he was chatting to the lazy boy leaning against the wall watching the clouds. So, pineapple is Shikamaru, puppy is Kiba, shades is. Naruto muttered to himself, desperately trying to memorize his classmates' names as fast as he could but once again faltering on a particular one for easily the 6th time in a row. Shino, Abarame Shino. God, are you always this slow? Ino asked exasperatedly, causing Naruto to whip around, an embarrassed flush on his face as he exclaimed, shut up. I just can't remember that one guy's name. I got the rest of them down, but Shade's name just isn't sticking. Honestly, Ino couldn't blame him. For some reason, Shino stood out so little that it was easy to forget who he was. Even trying to remember him was difficult for some reason. If it weren't for her habit of listening to gossip from the flower shop where his parents sometimes bought flowers and asked her whether people were getting along with him in class, she would probably also forget he even existed. But she was having fun picking on the blonde and listening to his aggravated groans from trying to memorize the silent boy's identity, so she didn't tell him this. Naruto just grunted in annoyance, before continuing, white as Hinata, fatso as HRMGH. As soon as she heard him say the name, Ino instantly leaned over, shocking the whiskered boy by clapping a hand tightly over his mouth. Across the way, said boy suddenly stood ramrod straight, almost dropping his potato chips as he swung his head around, as if searching for something. Even though they had been nowhere nearby, it was as if Koji could sense those who would dare use that name against him. Beside him, Shikamaru interrupted his cloud gazing for a second, fixing a lazy eye on Koji as he asked, what's up? Both Ino and Naruto held their breath together as Koji continued to glance about, before slowly muttering, must have been mistaken. Ino let out a slow, pent-up breath as she finally started to release Naruto's face, which was turning slightly red from her tight grip, though whether it was from her hold or embarrassment from the girl's touch was up in the air, to say the least. However, at the last second as she was about to lift her hand away, she accidentally brushed against the sensitive whisker-like birthmarks on his face. It was fortunate for Naruto's newfound respect and reputation with Ino that she was too distracted by her fear of Koji's reaction to Naruto's words that she missed Naruto's involuntary reaction. As her hand had brushed against those sensitive birthmarks, Naruto had seemingly leaned into the touch, eyes closing slightly as he purred. However, it had only been for a single second, and as soon as her hand lifted away, the involuntary reaction had stopped. It seemed not even Naruto, the one who had purred, noticed it happening. However, even if these two hadn't noticed it, the eavesdropper with pure white eyes widened in surprise at what she had just seen, and a single unbidden thought floated through Hinata Hyuga's mind. Cute. Back with Ino, the blonde shook her head, a hand pressed to her face as if to recover from what had just happened, before she fixed a glare on Naruto that made him jump in fear. Pointing over at Koji, a deadly serious expression on her face, Ino warned, if you value your life, then don't ever say that word in Koji's proximity in the future. Ha! Why not? Naruto asked in reply, at which Ino internally struggled between the impulse to either facepalm at his stupidity or simply slap him for the same reason. Settling on just facepalming herself, Ino explained slowly, as if she was dealing with a simpleton, because Koji will make a pancake out of you, that's why. Naruto just grumbled something that sounded like he doubted the fat kid's chances of being able to do it, but after a few seconds he just shrugged, before glancing about the playground, trying to spot if there were any others from their class he recognized. Seeing a certain pair in the distance, or more a stalker following another boy, Naruto continued, so Pinky is Sakura. Ino nodded, before venomously adding forward girl would also work, but Pinky is more obvious, I guess. Naruto was surprised for a second, before remembering what had happened when he had first entered the classroom that morning. Glancing back in Sakura's direction, he realized he recognized the one being stalked by not only Sakura but a lot more girls who he couldn't recognize. It was the neighbor that his Mizu Bunchin had soaked the worst, Suzuki. So, the broody dude with the duck's ass hairstyle is Suzuki then? Naruto asked to confirm, before realizing just what he had actually said and to whom. Instantly Naruto went on the defensive, covering his head with his arms as quickly as he could before the girl beside him could attack him. However, Ino just looked over in Suzuki's direction, her face showing some surprise as she muttered, duck's ass? You know, now that you mention it. Naruto stopped wincing as he slowly pulled his arms back from protecting his head, surprised and glad that the platinum blonde beside him hadn't attacked him in response to insulting the boy she obviously liked. Then it suddenly dawned on him, why didn't she attack him? Ino-chan. Naruto asked hesitantly, taking a chance on adding the friendlier suffix to her name. The only reaction from the girl, who was still staring at the boy in the distance, was a Well, what's up with you, Sakura, and Suzuki then? Naruto asked. Ino just turned from looking at Suzuki to give him a blank look, as if he'd just asked something idiotic, asking sarcastically, what do you think? Naruto actually thought about it for a second before replying, well, at first I thought you two might be after that Suzuki guy. Ino just nodded, pointing at Sakura as she said, yep, me and forward girl over there are after Suzuki. Hearing this caused Naruto's ego to deflate slightly. In some distant part of his mind, he had hoped that the Yamanaka girl had warmed up to him because perhaps she had liked him in some way. However, hearing that she already had another guy she liked was slightly depressing. Ignorant to the spiraling mood of the boy beside her, Ino pumped her fist in the air, eyes almost on fire as she exclaimed, "Yep, I'm definitely going to beat Forward Girl. Suzuki is as good as mine." Something about what she said sounded odd, and Naruto looked back up at her in confusion, asking, "Hold on, you're after him to beat Sakura?" Once again, Naruto got hit with the patronizing glare as Ino rolled her eyes, answering, "Duh, why else? Because you might, like Suzuki." Naruto didn't expect the reaction from Ino that he got. Ino actually burst out laughing, having to clap a hand over her own mouth to try and keep the noise down so that neither the moody boy nor the fawning girl would overhear. "Me, ha ha ha, and Suzuki, poofed." Ino tried to say something between her laughter, but it was indistinct. Somehow, Naruto got the gist that she was making fun of what he said, which caused him to go red in embarrassment and annoyance, shouting back, "Hey, what else was I supposed to think?" However, Ino just kept on laughing at his expense for a good while. Naruto wanted to get angrier at her for it, but after seeing the bright smile of mirth as she tried to suppress her giggles, Naruto couldn't help but smile slightly himself, taking the edge off of his annoyance with her. As she finally managed to calm down enough, actually having to wipe a tear from her eye as the last fit of giggles subsided, Ino looked back over at the blonde boy before explaining, "Look, maybe he might have been interesting years ago, but unless you're as crazy as Forward Girl or as brainless as those other fangirls, you can only handle so much moodiness. I got bored of it years ago. I'm only doing it to beat Forward Girl." However, she quickly added, "There's also the bonus of being known as the girl that finally got the heartthrob of the school." "Heartthrob?" Naruto asked in disbelief before turning to scrutinize the Uchiha. Sure, Suzuki was slightly taller than average, something that instantly ticked Naruto off as he hated noticing that he was still slightly short for his age. Besides the height, he just couldn't think of anything else interesting about Suzuki's looks, certainly not enough to draw that massive crowd of girls that seemed to be tailing the boy as he walked straight up to where Naruto was sitting, his eyes dead set on Naruto's own. "Huh?" Naruto blurted out in surprise as he realized the guy he had just been scrutinizing was actually right in front of him, looking down at him with that strange stare of his. "I don't like this guy." He couldn't put his finger on it, but in that split second that Naruto looked up at Suzuki's face, he realized he didn't like the Uchiha. There was something about how he looked, like one who was simply putting up with what was around him, as if even looking down at Naruto was nothing. The blonde may have even preferred to have seen a sneer on the boy's face, disgust like so many of the other villagers radiated at him, but it wasn't disgust, contempt, friendliness, or anything. His eyes looked dead to the blonde. Not only that, Naruto got the distinct feeling that Suzuki wasn't even looking at him, but through him. It was as if even though Suzuki had deliberately gone out of his way to target Naruto, it wasn't really the blonde who the Uchiha had his eyes set on. After that frozen moment finally thawed, everything snapped back to real time. Ino shot to her feet, a look of blissful idiocy on her face as she squealed, "Suzuki-kun, you came here to see me? Like hell Suzuki-kun would see you." A certain pink-haired girl roared with a ferocity that Naruto would have never imagined from her slight frame. He cringed, trying to cover his ears. For an instant, he caught a glimpse of something akin to feeling on the perpetually brooding Uchiha's face a flash of irritation at the loud outburst, but it vanished just as quickly. As the two girls began to bicker and argue, hurling insults at each other, Suzuki finally spoke. You're Uzumaki, right?" Naruto was once again struck with the feeling he wouldn't like this guy, but this time, he knew exactly why. That voice just grated on his nerves. It was low and cool sounding, and even as Naruto became annoyed by this fact, the group of fangirls who were stalking Suzuki, minus the two on the verge of the mother of all catfights, swooned just at the sound of it. Naruto finally started to understand why Suzuki had so many followers and admirers. His voice alone literally oozed pride and confidence. Even if he came off as a sort of emo type, there was no doubt that Suzuki Uchiha was supremely confident in himself, perhaps even arrogantly so. Annoyed by this revelation, Naruto replied defensively, "Who wants to know?" Suzuki's pitch-black eyes bore into Naruto's as he replied bluntly, "Uchiha Suzuki." Naruto already knew who Suzuki was, he even understood the significance of the Uchiha name, quickly figuring that was the source of the almost arrogant pride he could hear in Suzuki's voice. Those from powerful clans often thought they were the god's gift to the world. Pushing himself up from where he had been sitting, Naruto stood face to face with Suzuki, relieved that the height difference he had noticed earlier wasn't as bad as he thought, just an inch or two. As he was about to ask what Suzuki wanted, he noticed the boy's eyes flick up and down his body, obviously sizing Naruto up. Deep in thought, the blonde prayed it was just for a threat assessment, and not because the Uchiha's obvious lack of interest in his fangirls meant a different kind of interest. That thought terrified Naruto, so much so that he paled slightly. Suzuki seemed to notice this, assuming it was some kind of fear from the blonde, maybe from recognizing the difference between the last descendant of the Uchiha and himself. Oh crap, why the hell is he smirking? Naruto panicked mentally, his anxiety rising as he noticed the change in Suzuki's expression. It took everything he had to keep his voice from squeaking with what could have been genuine fear of the Uchiha as he asked defensively, "What do you want with me?" "Uzumaki, I want to fight you," Sasuke challenged, his smirk widening as he expected Naruto to shrink from the challenge, just like all the other pathetic students in their class. However, Naruto did the opposite, letting out a sigh of relief that his fears were unfounded. Sasuke had only come to challenge him to a fight. Wait, Naruto realized in a moment of confusion, turning back to look up at Sasuke and asking, why? I want to test my strength against yours. Now will you fight me?" Sasuke replied coolly, his voice brimming with confidence. Naruto even saw a spark in the Uchiha's eyes for a second before they returned to their almost dead look. Naruto barely had to think about it, an eager smile full of excitement spreading across his face. He hadn't expected a chance to spar with anyone in his year, especially on the very first day, and the supposed #1 student was asking him to fight. There was no way he would turn down such an offer. The two boys stared each other down from across their chosen battlefield, neither one moving a muscle, both looking for any sign of weakness in their opponent. When the news spread that the new kid and the #1 were about to fight, it had gathered nearly the entire student year to watch. Even now, some of the kids were placing bets on the outcome of the battle. Unfortunately for Naruto, most of the bets were on how long it would take for Sasuke to beat him, but there was the occasional newly smitten fangirl, recent traitors to the Sasuke fandom who had been swayed by the blonde's amazing looks, who was betting that Naruto would win. But now, as the two faced off, the crowd of onlookers collectively held their breath in anticipation. Even Sakura and Ino stopped cheering for their obvious favorite, awed by the tension between the two boys, which was unusually strong for children their age. The playground, which would normally be alive with activity, was deathly silent. As the seconds passed, a small gust of wind kicked up the dust and leaves scattered across the grounds, the leaves swirling in the eddies of the wind before slowly falling back to earth. As the last leaf finally hit the ground, this was the unwritten signal for time to restart as both boys moved as one. Suddenly, the air between them was a storm of metal clashing against metal, each boy's hands a blur as shuriken and kunai met each other in midair with incredible accuracy. Each kunai was deflected down to the earth by another, each shuriken was sent flying in opposite directions as they crashed into one another. Even before all the projectiles had fallen to the earth, 6 kunai and 4 shuriken thrown from Sasuke's hands and a matching number thrown by Naruto, both boys kicked against the ground hard, launching themselves through the rain of falling projectiles to attack each other head-on. Sasuke's attack came first, his right fist drawn back even before they had fully closed the distance, the punch aimed for Naruto's face. However, Naruto easily blocked the blow with his opposite forearm, stomping hard on the ground for support before kicking his right leg forward, aiming a powerful kick at Sasuke's ribs. Sasuke ducked in slightly to block the kick with his left forearm before dropping further, aiming a low spin kick to sweep Naruto's standing leg from under him. However, Naruto snapped his right leg back before leaping away from Sasuke, jumping over Sasuke's leg sweep. As he backflipped in midair, Naruto pulled several more shuriken from his leg pouch halfway through the flip before throwing them at the still ducking Sasuke to prevent him from countering. In retaliation, Sasuke quickly drew a kunai from inside his pouch, knocking the single shuriken that Naruto had deliberately aimed at his leg out of midair before avoiding the other scattered shuriken. He quickly spun the kunai in his grip before throwing it at the point where Naruto would land. Grinning fiercely, Naruto landed softly as he raised a hand to his shoulder to grab something. His face fell as his hand closed on empty air, realizing dumbly that he no longer had a sword strapped there as he watched the kunai he had planned to cut out of the air fly at him. With a noise that sounded suspiciously like yikes, Naruto barely managed to twist his body out of the way before the kunai would have hit him dead center in the chest, instead impacting the tree behind him before falling into the grass. The practiced kunai's edge was too blunt to actually embed itself into the tree. However, no one in the audience commented on the strange noise Naruto let slip or the fact that he barely dodged the kunai. Instead, their jaws were nearly on the ground at the amazing display of skill and speed between the two boys. Now that would have been embarrassing, Naruto thought, mentally face-palming himself for his own stupidity and forgetting his sword had been confiscated. While he knew the chain link on his vest would have stopped the thrown kunai from injuring him, he still would have died of embarrassment for making such a stupid mistake. However, he didn't have time to think further as Sasuke charged at him once more. Shaking the thought out of his head, Naruto took his taijutsu stance again, readying himself to stop Sasuke's charge. The next minute was a blur of punching and kicking, attack and counterattack as Uchiha and Uzumaki struck out at each other again and again, weapons forgotten as they fought with pure taijutsu. He's kinda good, Naruto realized eagerly, his grin widening even in the face of the fierce opponent as he wrenched his head to the right, narrowly avoiding a powerful punch from Sasuke. The raven-haired boy wasn't holding back in the slightest now, breathing heavily as he put as much strength as he could into each attack. This dope, Sasuke cursed internally as Naruto once again avoided his attacks, the blonde's own elbow striking out in a counter, forcing Sasuke to take the impact with his forearm in turn, his own arm going numb from the aggressive strength in Naruto's attacks. Why can't I hit him? Both of the two boys were as fast as each other, neither able to land a decisive hit, but it was already clear who had the power advantage. Even though Sasuke was starting to sweat from his exertion, putting everything he could behind each attack, Naruto's own moves were every bit as fierce, and unlike Sasuke, the blonde wasn't even tiring, his breathing still smooth as he was instead grinning widely as if he was having the time of his life. Suddenly, an attack broke through the storm of impacts between the two. Naruto's fist lanced forward, aimed for the center of Sasuke's chest. Sasuke twisted his body, intending to let the attack pass before countering once again in the opening created. But as the attack passed, wide of its original mark, the Uchiha's eyes widened as he felt an impact, the attack grazing his torso. It was barely a brush, but it was still a hit, the first of the match. Cursing under his breath, Sasuke abandoned his plan, leaping away from the blonde quickly to gain distance for a respite. Naruto didn't follow, instead holding the exact pose from his punch as he watched Sasuke land further away, breathing heavily. If anyone had been looking closely, there was a slight flash of annoyance that crossed the blonde's features, almost as if something had gone wrong, or if something he expected to happen didn't. However, even if anyone had seen, they would never have guessed the real reason for this slight change, and Naruto recovered quickly, correcting his pose as he faced Sasuke once more. "S Sasuke-kun?" In the watching crowd, Sakura whispered this quietly, almost in confusion. The others watching were just as surprised. Chuji had stopped halfway through eating another crisp, his hand hovering in midair as he watched in confusion. No one could beat Sasuke, the last scion of the Uchiha clan. This was the unspoken rule among the academy students, earned from the numerous sparring matches organized between the students. No matter who faced him, no matter what they tried, Sasuke would defeat them, barely even acknowledging their struggles as he won each battle, his brooding face ever impassive as he looked down upon those he defeated as if he couldn't even see them. But there was no mistaking it. Sasuke had just retreated from his opponent. Even if the match hadn't yet been won, no one before had managed to pressure the Uchiha to the point of retreating. Now, not only was Sasuke glaring balefully at his enemy as he tried to regain his breath, but the new blonde student who had broken Sasuke's unbeaten streak without even breaking a sweat was grinning happily like an idiot. An amazingly strong, good-looking idiot, but an idiot nonetheless. That nameless daube. Sasuke growled internally as he finally got his breathing back under control. He had not expected much from the blonde boy. Even if, as Naruto claimed, he had been training away from the village, he was still just a normal person. He didn't even have the virtue of a reasonably strong clan technique, he was a nameless daube. Compared to that, he, Sasuke Uchiha, was the last remaining member of the proud Uchiha, the once strongest and most renowned clan of Konoha. By his birthright, he was superior to any other clan of Konoha, let alone a boy who didn't have a worthy clan to himself. Calm down, he's a nobody, I shouldn't get worked up like this, Sasuke thought to himself as he made an effort to force his body to relax. Getting worked up that this daube was able to match him in taijutsu was pointless. If, by some miracle, he can match me in taijutsu, Sasuke thought as he took a deep breath, finally calming himself as he stood up, straight and proud. As he did so, he unclenched his fists before moving his hands rapidly. I'll show him his place with ninjutsu. Sasuke finished, his hands forming the seals he needed for his jutsu. As Naruto watched, Sasuke's body outline seemed to waver before he literally split into multiple copies of himself. Within a second, the single enemy had become four. Four versions of Sasuke now smirked arrogantly as they faced off against Naruto, each clone drawing a kunai from their respective pouch. At the sight of her idol finally getting ready to fight again, Sakura got over her earlier shock and began cheering loudly, shouting out, "Go Sasuke, kick that stupid blonde's ass." The said blonde sweat dropped slightly, even the three clones of Sasuke and the original himself, for whom the cheering was for, couldn't help but roll their eyes at the stupid cheering, obviously annoyed at the interruption. Sakura was quickly joined by numerous other females in the crowd, turning the single shout into a tidal wave of cheering for the Uchiha and jeering for the blonde. However, what shocked some of the male portion of the crowd, who had been about to roll their eyes, was a different shout. "Go Naruto!" As if to combat the increasing shouts of the Sasuke fandom, the newly started Uzumaki fangirls decided to make their presence known, trying to drown out the shouts from the opposite fandom. As the cheering got louder, even the guys eventually got pulled into cheering as well, although unlike the female fandom, the cheers for the guys were nearly 100% pro Naruto. The male contingency was obviously sick and tired of the previous number one and eager to see the Uchiha toppled from the top spot. Only four among the entire crowd acted differently from the roaring mass. Shino refused to join in the pointless roaring since he did not wholly care about the outcome of the match and found it illogical to support either in that situation. Shikamaru was the same, but his was purely out of sheer laziness. He was watching the match but couldn't be bothered to join in. Ino hesitated for a second, wanting to cheer for the friendlier boy, but Sakura's obvious support for Sasuke made her join in the Uchiha support, desperate to beat her rival and outshouting her. Hinata, on the other hand, wanted to join in supporting Naruto but was too shy to shout, instead barely whispering her stuttered support. Hearing the support for him, Naruto was emotionally touched, unlike his opponent, who was obviously annoyed at the interruption. Putting his happiness at the support aside, Naruto gave one quick pump of his fist in his supporter's general direction before returning his attention to Sasuke. Sasuke charged instantly, all three clones following with him as the group charged the blonde. Naruto quickly drew several kunai from within his pouch, his eyes darting across the four enemies, trying to see if there were any anomalies in the clones to tell them apart from the original. However, no sooner had he tried to identify the real Sasuke, pulling his arm back in preparation to throw, the group of clones converged on one another, their paths crossing each other's rapidly to throw off Naruto's ability to focus solely on the original. Sasuke and his clones smirked confidently as they quickly closed the distance between themselves and Naruto. "Not bad, team," Naruto half complimented as he leapt away from the group, trying to gain distance for an idea of what to do next. As he did so, he noticed something interesting about the group of Sasukes. As he realized what it meant, he couldn't help but grin again. Naruto was really enjoying this. It had been ages since he had been able to spar with anyone his own age, and even if it was nowhere near as challenging as his practices with his Shisho, Sasuke wasn't that bad, even if he was annoyingly arrogant. While Naruto was still holding back some from his opponent, Sasuke was still giving him a decent challenge, and Naruto relished the opportunity to compare his skills against the supposedly legendary skills of the Uchiha. As Naruto was about to land, his own hands flashed through a series of hand seals. Sasuke watched the sequence Naruto used, instantly recognizing the technique he was preparing as the Kawarimi no Jutsu, and realized that Naruto was going to use the technique to avoid the group attack. No sooner had Naruto finished than the Uchiha clones converged on him instantly, moving around the blonde to surround him, ready to charge in to claim victory. In a surrounding formation, it becomes hard to tell where an attack will come from, for no one can see behind them, making it a perfect blind spot. As such, it can be presumed that the attack coming from behind him would be Sasuke's real attack. However, at the same time, it could be any of them, for if it is most obvious that the attack would come from behind, then to be unpredictable, a shinobi would take a different angle of attack. Rather than being the real Sasuke and three clones, it was four clones of Sasuke that surrounded the blonde. Sasuke had used the Bunshin no Jutsu again when the clones converged, using them to cover the seal sequence he was performing from Naruto's view. He created a fourth clone to take his place, something no other student in their year could manage thanks to their limited chakra capacity, and as such something nobody could have predicted. Sasuke had directed the clones to move close to the crowd of onlookers, and using the motion to cover his own, he had dived into the crowd to hide himself, moving amongst the group carefully so he could ambush Naruto when he tried to deal with the clones. Now in position to attack Naruto, he was unsure where Naruto would appear due to the blonde's use of the Kawarimi no Jutsu. Acting quickly, Sasuke decided to attack from his position before Naruto could substitute. He sent a command through the chakra connecting him to the clones to delay their attack for a second, believing Naruto intended to substitute when they hit him. As the clones finally penned in the blonde, the Uchiha let loose with multiple shuriken. Several onlookers cried out in surprise as shuriken burst through the gaps between them, several fans turning about in outrage to find out who was trying to sabotage the match. As the blunt stars flew for Naruto's blind spot, all four clones' smirks grew greater. Victory was theirs. One Naruto Uzumaki turned slightly away from the clone before him, barely a fractional movement, but it revealed one fact to the real Uchiha amongst the crowd, who was watching the stars home in on him: a wide grin. Suddenly, Sasuke felt a strange sensation of being pulled forcibly from all directions. Before he could figure out what it was, his fast senses saw the shuriken in midair once more, but something was different. They were now flying at him. As Sasuke's eyes registered the crowd of onlookers behind the stars, one Uzumaki Naruto's Cheshire grin plastered across his face from where he stood between Kiba and Shino. Time seemed to freeze for the Uchiha as he realized what had happened. Naruto had somehow seen through his plan. The reason why he was now standing, several shuriken flying for him rather than his enemy, was because Sasuke was standing now where Naruto had been only moments before. Naruto had used the Kawarimi no Jutsu to substitute the real Sasuke from amidst the crowd. It was too late to dodge. Sasuke was forced to cross his arms before his body to stop the shuriken from tagging any vital spots. Instead, the blunted edges impacted on his arms and stomach with enough force to sting, causing red welts to spring up on both his arms even as they bounced away, clattering to the ground. With the caster injured and distracted, the four clones, now surrounding their master rather than their original target, automatically dispersed, leaving Sasuke standing alone, slowly uncrossing his arms as he resisted the urge to wince in pain from the bruises. Nearly everybody fell completely silent in shock and surprise. Amidst this new stunned silence, even Shikamaru had to silently give praise where it was due. As Naruto pushed past the crowd to face Sasuke again, Shikamaru easily analyzed what had happened. Sasuke had forgotten one of the basics, and Naruto had grasped it in mid-battle and expertly turned it on the Uchiha. The clones Sasuke had made were each almost perfect, every detail right where it needed to be. Shikamaru doubted that anybody would have been able to easily grasp the difference between the clones and their original. Sasuke's plan had also been good. Using the jutsu a second time to cover his own exit from the group was a sound plan, and the Uchiha's execution had also been sound. Nobody had noticed him joining the crowd. However, the Bunshin no Jutsu had one fatal flaw. While in normal combat situations in areas like forests, there were multiple obstacles that could have covered this flaw, but their match was in an open field, and the sun was shining brightly down. The clones had no shadows, and Naruto must have noticed that no one in the offensive group had a shadow, so the blonde had seen Sasuke's plan and come up with a counter for it. Man, I figured he was just an idiot, but that wasn't bad at all, Shikamaru thought to himself as he watched the pair face off again. Sasuke was silently raging in anger as he saw that idiotic grin on Naruto's face again. Damn it! How can I, an Uchiha, one of the elite, be losing to this clanless dope? Even now, Sasuke could see it in his opponent's eyes. Naruto believed he had won and the battle was already his. Naruto believed he was the stronger of the two of them, and that enraged the Uchiha. This is not over. Sasuke shouted out defiantly with a roar, as his hands moved rapidly. Naruto's eyes widened as he saw seal after seal formed rapidly by Sasuke's hands before he stopped, his hands held together on one last seal, fingers interlaced together with the index and middle finger pointed upwards. Sasuke held this seal as he locked eyes with his enemy, his eyes blazing with an emotion Naruto couldn't recognize, as Sasuke drew sharp breath after sharp breath. While he didn't recognize the jutsu from just the seal Sasuke's hands had literally spelled out, there was definitely no mistaking it as one of the 3 academy-level jutsu, and there was no way to mistake that last seal Sasuke was still holding before him. That's the tiger seal, that means it's probably a katan he's going to use. Naruto realized with shock as the cheering started once again from the Sasuke faction in the crowd. Only a handful aside from Naruto were actually fast enough at reading hand movements to realize Sasuke was most definitely not preparing an academy jutsu. What's going on? No pre-genin student should have the chakra reserves necessary for elemental manipulation already, Shikamaru thought to himself as he brought his attention away from the clouds into the now dangerous battle between the two. In response, Naruto glared back at Sasuke, his grin lost as he considered what to do next. Even if that last seal meant it was probably an offensive katan, there was no way to be sure, and the blonde knew he had very few defensive jutsu at his call. Taking a gamble that Sasuke's jutsu would be a katan, Naruto quickly decided what to do. With this decision, he flicked a hand up to his blue jacket, unbuttoning the second pocket on the left breast as he quickly drew a small object from within. What he pulled out looked like a soldier pill at first but was slightly translucent with a strange blue tint, a small kanji written on the sphere's surface, Mizu. Without any additional water nearby to use, I don't have the control yet to use this without a little additional help, Naruto thought internally as he popped the sphere into his mouth, clamping it between his back teeth but not biting down on the object. With his preparations complete, Naruto's hands started to form seals at a rapid pace. Sasuke didn't respond to this or use his jutsu, holding his hands in the tiger seal as if waiting to see what Naruto would do in turn. Tiger snake rat snake tiger. In comparison to the sequence of seals Sasuke had used, the jutsu Naruto readied used less. However, as Naruto ended the sequence of seals his hands had rapidly flashed through, his technique ended with the same seal that Sasuke's hands formed. Both boys now mirroring each other's stance but opposing one another, the only difference being that Sasuke had his trademark sneer written on his features, while Naruto was keeping his mouth slightly open, being careful not to bite down on the sphere before time. Sasuke let out a short bark of laughter, his features twisting into a sneer as he mistook the intentions of the blonde, taunting back, "You really think you can beat me in ninjutsu? That's the tiger seal, so that's probably a katan as well. Do you really think you, a nameless dope, can beat an Uchiha with fire?" At these words, it finally dawned on the rest of the still cheering group that something very dangerous was about to happen right in front of them. Somebody get Irika-sensei. Kya! What are they doing? These and numerous other shouts were audible from the crowd of onlookers, now slightly panicked that a clash of actual ninjutsu was imminent between the two combatants. The majority of them were now backing away as fast as they could from the pair of boys to avoid getting caught up in whatever jutsu was about to be unleashed. However, neither Sasuke nor Naruto could hear them, their eyes only on each other. Sasuke's burning with rage and pride, angry that he had been humiliated thus far in combat and determined to prove to this upstart that he was no match for the skills of the Uchiha. Naruto on the other hand was focusing only on his opponent's movements, waiting for the sign that the Uchiha was about to attack. As once more, both boys moved simultaneously, mimicking each other's movements as they both drew an incredibly deep breath, hands releasing the tiger seal as they each made a ring with the thumb and index finger of their right hand, placing it before their mouths, as their lips started to form the shouted words of their techniques. Both spoke at the same time, but Sasuke's technique was seemingly the faster of the two. Katan, Ga. Kakya no Jutsu. As those words were shouted out, Sasuke finally expelled the breath he had taken, a stream of fire expelled from between his lips as he breathed the chakra from his system out, forming a large flaming fireball right before him, one that flickered and pulsed with its intensity, burning the air around the two combatants with its ferocity. Within moments of the fireball solidifying, it was sent roaring forward straight for the blonde whiskered boy, propelled by the steady stream of fire flying from Sasuke's mouth. As this fireball flew straight for Naruto, there was a mixture of shouts of amazement and wonder at the might of the jutsu, and in one or two cases, screams of fear as it threatened to engulf him instantly. However, Naruto didn't even flinch as the inferno bore down upon him. Instead, he finally bit down with his teeth, cracking the sphere inside his mouth, which strangely shattered Aiken to glass as if it was hollow as he expelled his own breath, shouting out the words of his technique. Suten, Sujin Hiki. Although his jutsu sequence had ended with the tiger symbol, it was the inverse of a katon, a suten. Water took the place of fire that everybody had expected from Naruto, as within a heartbeat, the chakra within his body amplified the water within his mouth. Naruto breathed out an incredibly powerful stream of water, aiming it straight for the heart of the huge fireball. Water and fire impacted one another with incredible force. The stream of water exploded into almost a wall as it smashed against the fireball Sasuke had summoned, sending a fountain spray of heated water all about the impact zone as the jutsu clashed. The wall of water pushed back against the huge fireball as Naruto continued to expel the powerful stream from his own body. On the opposite side, Sasuke cursed to himself as he poured as much chakra as he could into the technique, willing the stream of flames to intensify. The fireball roared ever greater with furious intensity as Sasuke tried to push through the wall of water that threatened to douse his katon by pure force. However, as Shikamaru could have told anybody had they not all been too dazed by the amazing spectacle before them, water is fire's weakness. There was no way an offensive katon technique could ever hope to overcome a defensive suten technique unless there was a massive difference in the chakra used. However, no matter how much Sasuke tried to pour his chakra into the technique, he had absolutely no hope of defeating Naruto's seemingly huge chakra supply. Combined with his technique being on the wrong side of the elemental table, he was destined to lose. Eventually, Sasuke was forced to stop spitting out the stream of fire, the chakra in his system running low as he could not support the technique further. The fireball lost its integrity as the wall of water devoured the flames, water boiling and hissing as it transformed into a massive cloud of steam that, thanks to the wind's direction, engulfed Naruto, hiding him from view as Naruto stopped his own technique, having bested Sasuke's completely. As the steam started to be pushed away, Sasuke shouted out in anger at the silhouette of Naruto, drawing a kunai between each gap of his fingers before throwing the storm of 8 kunai straight at Naruto. However, having been hidden in the steam cloud, coughing as he tried to get a clear breath from the backwash of his own technique, Naruto didn't see them coming. There were several loud impacts and a cry of pain as the cloud of steam finally started to disperse, the majority of it blown to the right by the wind, revealing Naruto within. Having been unable to see the attack, Naruto had seemingly taken the attacks badly, a cut in the center of his forehead showing where one of the kunai had hit him, showing what would have been a fatal injury in a real-life battle. Naruto was seemingly frozen in shock, as if the impact had stunned him. However, even as Sasuke thought arrogantly that with this obviously fatal injury, he had finally put the dobe in his place, he hadn't noticed that the cloud of steam had been blown by the wind so that the majority of the dense mist was pushed close by him. Suddenly the cloud of steam seemingly exploded outwards, a shadow of a boy erupting from within the mist, his blue jacket heavily damp with steam. Without thinking, Sasuke was hit by Naruto's fist, which covered the distance between them in a single leap. The Uchiha was too stunned to react or dodge, and the sheer force of Naruto's punch sent him flying backward off his feet. This time, he couldn't recover, crashing painfully to the ground. The person who hit him stood up straight, his blonde ponytail wet from hiding in the steam he had created as the injured Naruto nearby exploded into a pool of water, revealing himself to be nothing more than a Mizubunshin. It took a few moments for Sasuke to finally stop tumbling, landing in an almost pathetic curled-up heap on the concrete. He was on the verge of losing consciousness as his head rang from the impact. "Sasuke-kun!" Sakura nearly screamed in a panic, bursting from the crowd and running straight for the fallen Uchiha. Seeing her rival charging, Ino could only spare Naruto an amazed glance at the strength he had shown before her instincts took over. She quickly chased after the pink-haired girl, determined not to let her get an advantage in their battle for Sasuke's attention. They were quickly followed by the rest of the Sasuke fangirl community, several of them giving Naruto death stares as they ran to their downed idol. After a few more seconds of dazed awe, the rest of the male students roared in cheers as an entire mob of students surged forward, startling Naruto, who barely had a moment to cry out, "What the dash," before he was swarmed by his classmates. One of the few who held back was concentrating hard as he tried to figure out what had just happened, his hands clasped in a strange pose as he thought. It's obvious what happened, but how is the interesting part? Shikamaru mused silently as he watched a struggling Naruto get thrown into the air by the jubilant mob, who were eager to show their gratitude to someone who finally bested the Uchiha, despite his protests. Naruto had used a powerful suten to block Sasuke's Katon Jutsu, then used the steam cloud to his advantage, creating a Mizubunshin to conceal his movements. He had clearly done this before Sasuke attacked, since there were no marks on Naruto from the Uchiha's last-ditch effort. Naruto had even checked the wind's direction to make sure he was as close as possible before launching his final attack. What was intriguing was how a genin had managed to manipulate enough water to use these techniques, considering the lack of rain or other water sources. That pill must be the key, Shikamaru quickly deduced. He had initially assumed the object Naruto had taken from his jacket pockets was something like a soldier pill, something to quickly restore chakra reserves. But now, thinking back, there was something odd about the object. However, his thoughts, the cheering crowds celebrating Naruto, the fangirls doting on Sasuke, and all other active thought was interrupted by a single, throaty roar. What the hell happened here? The crowds around Sasuke and Naruto almost flew away in fear as their sensei, a scar-faced Irika, appeared in a burst of smoke from a shunshin technique. A vein on his forehead was threatening to pop as he bellowed. What surprised Naruto, however, was the second Chuunin who had arrived with Irika, a man with shoulder-length white hair whom Naruto hadn't seen before. Naruto, what the hell did you do this time? Irika roared at him when he saw Sasuke's state on the ground. Naruto turned, a bit of panic setting in as he tried to find a way to explain decking a classmate, but a smooth voice cut in first, surprising Naruto as it said, Now, Irika, it just looks to me like our top student wanted to test the new kid out and found him a bit much to handle. Naruto looked up in surprise at the new Chuunin's face, the white-haired man smiling slightly as he faced the scar-faced Irika. The teacher hesitated for a half-second upon hearing the Chuunin dismiss what was clearly a dangerous fight as nothing, before quickly saying, Mizuki, unrestricted fighting without an instructor's supervising dash. However, Mizuki simply waved amicably, smiling as he looked down at Naruto cheerfully, cutting in, but Naruto was clearly new here and was probably unaware of the rules regarding needing a supervisor for sparring sessions. Naruto just blinked in slight confusion. It felt weird having an adult stand up for him. Kauta had looked after him for years, but he wasn't from Konoha. It just felt strange for any of the people he assumed all seemingly hated him to now defend him. But even as Mizuki smiled down at him, something felt off. For some reason he couldn't pinpoint, something felt odd about Mizuki helping him. It could have just been the strangeness of a Konoha ninja being kind, but he wasn't sure. Some instinct seemed to be nagging at the back of his mind, telling him to be wary of this white-haired man. It doesn't matter, it's obvious that you're not meant to pick fights with the other students, Irika replied vehemently, sweeping his arm in Sasuke's general direction as if to emphasize his argument. Sasuke literally growled in response, picking himself up gingerly as the two Chuunin watched him. He surprised Naruto by glaring up at Irika as if he was annoyed with the sensei's interruption, replying, It was just a sparring match, and I challenged him. I'll take responsibility, sensei. As Irika gaped at the stubborn Uchiha, he didn't notice the odd emphasis Sasuke used on sensei to show his disdain for the Chuunin before him. Mizuki just shrugged good-naturedly before saying, Boys will be boys. I think we can let this one slide, Irika. No real harm done, right? Now, I think it would be best if you escorted Sasuke to the medical office to get those little injuries looked at, Irika. I'll keep watch over the other kids for the rest of lunch. Mizuki insisted, patting his fellow Chuunin on the back with a smile as if to signal, I'll leave it to you. With an exasperated sigh, Irika started to lead Sasuke away. The Uchiha walked stiffly, suppressing the pain in his body, refusing to give his opponent the satisfaction of having injured him, even if it didn't occur to him that Naruto really didn't care. With one last glare at Naruto, mentally vowing that he would defeat him next time, Sasuke disappeared from the playground. Smiling at something no one would have understood, Mizuki clapped loudly to get all the other students' attention, announcing loudly, That's all, kids, the show's over. Now get back to playing and whatnot unless you'd rather we cut the lunch break short and get back to classes. As the students at the academy finally broke up and resumed their normal break time activities, Kauta and Sarutobi had just about wrapped up their long discussion in the Hokage Tower. On the desk before the Hokage, there was a large notebook with several pages of notes jotted down that came up during the two's discussion. After the initial hassle caused by Kauta vehemently trying to explain his lack of interest in becoming a Konoha shinobi, which involved several bouts of colorful language describing the many ways the sage was displeased by the notion, several innovative descriptions of what Sarutobi could do with his proposal, and many other interesting displays of a lack of cooperation, the Hokage had finally gotten over every reason as to why this had to happen for Naruto's sake, and so the negotiations between the two began. At first, Hiruzen had been worried about what the sage might say in the negotiations, but after the first few minutes, a wide smile had spread across the old man's features as he realized what Kauta had planned. The last 2 hours had been spent between the two of them hashing out every possible scenario, plan, and necessary condition required to encourage Kauta to join Konoha's shinobi forces. The sheets of notes before the Hokage were the result of the negotiations, and Sarutobi had to admit he was both impressed and pleased. While he would have given the sage any leeway necessary to keep Naruto's mentor in Konoha, it was to combat the council's interference that Sarutobi had suggested Kauta join the shinobi. However, with Kauta's help, the Hokage now had a viable plan to use against the council. Sarutobi couldn't help but let out a low chuckle at the thought of the expressions the council members would have when he presented this to them in the next council meeting. Kauta, having calmed down immensely from the earlier events, looked back at the Hokage in surprise, asking, "Did you think of something I missed?" The old man just shook his head, explaining, "No, Kauta-san, I'm just imagining how the old war hawk will look when he hears these terms. Just be prepared for a lot of arguing when this is presented to the council." Kauta just smiled enigmatically in response, before returning his gaze out the window and toward the village. As the Hokage flipped through the notes, giving it one last look over, Kauta softly asked, "Are you still adamant about refusing to tell me who his parents are?" Sarutobi paused his scanning of the notes, sighing softly as he looked back up at the sage. He already had a feeling that the sage might at least have a vague idea of the boy's parentage, but even if Sarutobi could trust Kauta with many things, there were limits to what he would say, and he didn't want to imagine how Kauta would react if he knew for sure that Naruto was, in fact, the son of the late Yondaime Hokage. So instead, the old man hid his emotions, giving the sage a penetrating glare as he answered, "Even if you have taken it upon yourself to be his guardian, I will not reveal such information to you." As if to punctuate his stance on the matter, the Hokage flared his considerable ki once. 1. Kauta remained indifferent to this display of power, shrugging his shoulders slightly as he replied, "So long as you keep your promise, I won't ask again." The Hokage almost growled at that. Almost. One of the many stipulations Kauta had given him was that if Naruto had any inheritance or legacy within Konoha that had been withheld for his protection due to being the Kyuubi Jinchuriki, it would be given to him when the boy reached Chunin rank. Normally, Sarutobi would have no problem with this, in fact, that had been his intention for the boy all along. However, that was taking into account that the average Chunin of Konoha would have enough experience to gain their rank at 16, and Kakashi's prediction after watching Naruto was that it could take as long as until he was 20. But those were the predictions before Naruto had left the village. Given that Kauta had been the one to personally train Naruto, Sarutobi had no doubt that Naruto would beat that benchmark by a wide margin, if by some chance he wasn't already Chunin rank in terms of strength. However, he had no way of knowing for sure, since Kauta had refused to give a detailed description of Naruto's strengths. As such, it was entirely possible the boy would make Chunin at 13, far before Sarutobi's original plan. However, he knew Kauta would settle for nothing less than that stipulation, and Sarutobi knew if he didn't agree, the sage would simply use that uncanny ability of his to easily figure out information that was supposed to be top secret. After all, this was the man who had figured out Naruto's identity as the Kyuubi Jinchuriki by simply having a conversation with the boy. Sarutobi had no doubt that if he was determined, Kauta could uncover the truth on his own, so agreeing to this term was the only way to have some measure of control over the situation. Then there was the second agreement. "I still personally don't agree with your other condition, Kauta-san. I think it's still too early." The sage merely shrugged again as Sarutobi glared at his back, answering, "Naruto is far smarter than you may think. If he isn't told soon, he will figure it out on his own. It's taken a lot of work to keep him from realizing it over the last 5 years, so I think it's only right he learns about the Kyuubi when he graduates." But Sarutobi started to object, rising sharply out of his chair, but he froze when Kauta turned his head sharply, his sky-blue irises visible as he regarded Sarutobi without his usual closed-eyed expression. Once again, the old Hokage had to admire the strength in those blue eyes, the powerful purpose in this man's eyes. Kauta spoke softly, his voice clear with purpose as he said, "He will learn the truth no matter what, so it's better to reveal it at a time of our choosing, not when it is too late. And besides..." With this, Kauta's eyes returned to their almost fully closed expression, that smile gracing his features as he assured, "Naruto is stronger than you think, and I have a feeling he'll take the information better than he would have before he left. I made sure of that." Sarutobi's eyes widened at the last words, his mouth almost dropping open as he realized what Kauta was hinting at. However, he quickly regained control of himself but was only able to give a forced whisper as he asked, "Who?" "A rather interesting young girl, not much older than Naruto, actually, but that's all I'll say," Kauta replied with a smile, adding, "It's not that I don't trust you to tell you more, but you know my policies." Sarutobi just shook his grizzled head, already feeling the oncoming headache this information gave him. He gave another glare up at the sage, but Kauta just ignored it. Sighing again, Sarutobi gave up on the argument. Reaching into his desk, he withdrew an object before tossing it over to the sage. Catching it in midair, Kauta looked down at the object, his brow raised in surprise as he looked down at the card in his hands, a card in a pouch with a small silver chain going through the top of it. "That's a V.I.P pass," the Hokage explained as Kauta flipped the object in his hands. "That should help you get around the village until the next council meeting is arranged and I can officially instate you as a citizen and shinobi of Konoha. I'll also alert the Umbu to your identity so there are no mistakes made." Kauta laughed softly as he took the chain and put it over his head, letting the pass dangle down onto the front of his robes as he answered, "Thank you, I'd rather avoid being mistaken for a spy, after all." The old man chuckled in turn, adding, "Be careful with it. I'll expect it to be returned after the meeting. You wouldn't believe how much those passes would be worth in the wrong hands." Kauta nodded in turn as he headed toward the door, asking, "How much longer until the academy lets Naruto out?" Sarutobi glanced up at the clock to check the time, before answering, "Assuming he hasn't tried to skip classes, I'd say it won't be for at least another 3 hours. I would advise you to use this time to scout around the village and get used to any changes since the last time you came here." With an affirmative nod, Kauta stepped out the door and left Sarutobi leaning tiredly in his chair. The old man was about to reach into his desk to retrieve his pipe again before his eye caught the massive stack of paperwork that he had put off during the time the sage had been talking with him. With a loud groan, the Hokage grudgingly got started on the one task he hated the most in the entire village.